top of that, so extra trash present in the dungeon with Necrotic is going to be quite dangerous for the tank. G already getting kind of caught here for Limit, not sure exactly what happened, but manages to, might have been a skip actually, but does manage to ward the death off as both teams sneak over towards the first boss's area and do a fairly substantial pull to try and proc that first reaping.
Yeah, this could have potentially been a pretty big mistake already by Jesse here from Unlimit's side, because he did get caught, wasn't in a shroud, and he needed to use his Shadow Melt to get rid of aggro, meaning that in case they plan on using a Shadow Melt so he can get a drink off before they pull a boss here, then he's not going to have the Shadow Melt available to him, meaning they might have to kill up reaping before they go into the boss in case their healer doesn't have enough mana to deal with the boss fight.
Both teams doing well to kind of not move too far away from the trash right now. You don't want to get that shattering throw on the tank too far. Just a lot of damage lost as the melee try to chase it around, and the tank is flying all over the place. So Method EU cleaning that up quite quickly. 16% on the board already, getting ready to proc their first reaping at 22%. And Sky Captain Craig, the first boss of the dungeon in this tyrannical setting, will be spawning in a moment. Max having a bit of trouble here for Limit as he heroic leaps away, trying to get away at 4%. So many necrotic stacks on him, just barely being kept alive here by the healing over time from Jeff. It finally does fall as the rest of the trash just kind of goes all over the place. All threat is lost right now. The battle res has come up, but he just scrambles to grab everything together, only having 2 taunts available to him once every 8 seconds, and of course the reset with that heroic leap which he had used earlier. So they're trying to manage, kind of struggling to really get everything together, while Method EU are looking really solid as always.
Yeah, Method EU already on the boss, already popped their Bloodlust. They pulled the reaping on top of the boss. Now the boss 74% just dismounted from the bird. Now this is going to be the difficult phase on this tyrannical setting, especially when you have necrotic too, because this boss here, the most dangerous part of it is the shot there. We can see that's why frag just dropped so low. It will target a random player, will cast a shot basically, and everyone in its path will get hit. It will pierce through. So if it goes to the tank, usually tanks, you know, they're the tankiest and they're fine with it, but if you have necrotic stacks on top of it, it might be difficult with this affix here. And other than that, you can just see the healer outranging and baiting those pulls on the floor.
Tanks are the tankiest indeed. A Sky Captain Crag here at 50% for Method EU. Xalia Zoe is playing fairly offensive on the corner. We can see all those wraths pouring in as he baits that parrot poop on the side. Melee doing well to spread out for that frontal. Frag, of course, pre-popping that anti-magic shell, making sure that all that fire damage is absorbed, at least as much of it as possible. Limit, of course, has now started to catch up a bit. Finally, the Bloodlust has ended for them. Sky Captain Crag at 60%. And, you know, kind of almost the disaster situation that we saw for Limit. They've actually managed to catch up a fair bit, keeping it fairly close together. But we are in a tyrannical setting, so bosses are harder and have more health. So this almost 20% split between the two teams is pretty substantial at this point, not to mention 1 death and no battle res on the board for Limit.
Yeah, Limit definitely has to watch out here now, as they're not only behind in boss, but in boss percentages, but also in deaths. And they also kind of messed up their positioning here a little bit, as you can see the pool spawning in melee now. Like if you bait the boss on, if you let the boss go up in a certain position, then you can actually bait the pulls to always be on your ranged, to always be on your healer. And you can see some of them spawning in melee here, meaning that they kind of messed up their positioning a little bit. While Method EU can just stand still in the same spot, never has to move their melees and the boss, because it's only Xalia baiting it in the back, and he's the one who has to move around.
Yeah, that, and you know, in this kind of environment where there's 3 melee on top of the tank, moving as one of the kind of parrot poops hits the ground with one of those fire frontals easily can clip multiple people, and you certainly don't want that with its kind of one-shot potential on the team. Method EU now looking solid as they're about to down. Sky Captain Craig here in a moment. We'll see a skip coming in from the team as likely now, I would assume, with the Shadow Mold or a Gingy on the rogue. Will he'll skip this Enforcer just on the side in a moment, or they're just kind of, everyone's going to skip it with their own mobility. Not sure what Frag's going to do. It looks like he just kind of runs through, likely to Shadow Meld that off. Just a huge waste of time to have to deal with that as they cross the bridge leading to the remaining bosses of the dungeon. Limit not too far behind here, 6% on the board for Sky Captain Craig and getting ready to do the same.
Yeah, so the healer on Limit side actually really low on mana here, as he just popped his Innervate at 10%, so now they should be fine to finish off the boss here. And we're probably going to see a very similar skip from them coming out as well, to skip this Enforcer, as you said, just very inefficient. While Method EU is preparing to do probably a pretty huge pull, as we can see the marks coming out. Now, these huge pulls, you always have to remember that there's a lot of things that you need to interrupt as well. They're not so easy as just like pulling a bunch of mobs on top of each other and just nuking them down. No, there's a lot of control they need to do as well. well. This is why you can see the markers coming out on those mobs. Some of them need to be assigned to people, like, so the Skull is being interrupted by Jinji, and the Moon is going to be interrupted by Maris, for example. And then you also have to see, as we see the Monks you see coming out here in the back.
A lot of damage coming out as those kind of Buccaneers start to get their going bananas and have a barrel of laughs there. Team doing well to interrupt it. A lot of cleave damage onto the group at that point. Frost Blast being interrupted on the side, as Nagura mentioned. That's just a huge kind of frontal cleave, wanting to make sure you don't get any of that damage in, especially when the tank is struggling with those necrotic stacks. They do no problem to down it, though, as they hit 38% on Method EU side here, dealing with the neutral mobs right before the Council of Captains. They will proc their second reaping at 40% off of this. We'll see what they can combine it with, but a huge pull coming in here for Limit on the side. Unfortunately, not working out so well for them, as Max does go down. Tree of Life was popped by Jeeth there. Sangra goes down. Trill had died earlier as well, so one of the DPS was missing, and it looks like a full team wipe will come in here. They do manage to salvage it as the healer Shadow Melds on the side, getting ready to res the tank, but the rest of the group has released and is running back, so already a bit of a disaster situation here for Limit, as Method has pulled their reaping, as they usually do, on top of the Council of Captains.
Yeah, this was a little bit of a bigger pull than Method did, I believe, so they just kind of pulled too much. They couldn't handle it. We saw Max just going down almost immediately here. There's you know, at least they didn't waste their bloodlust for something like that. But I assume that some of the DPS wasted a lot of cooldowns here. I assume the DK, for example, used a lot of them. So they can't do the same pull again. They need to wait for cooldowns to come back up. They need to go slower here. So this is going to cost them a lot of time just because of wasting cooldowns, wasting time to reset, wasting time to rest up. Well, Method use already proc their second reaping wave and are already on the captains here, and on 50%, so they're almost about to down them as well on a tyrannical setting. Just it seems look like how much DPS they have if you look at the damage meter. Of course, some of it is from the reaping wave, but still.
Yeah, I mean, they're just playing really well with the brews here. One of the keys to this combo with Captain Raoul and Captain Jolly right now, as those kind of buff brews or damaging brews, the bad brews, fall down from the sky. Two of them, of course, are buffs, haste and crit, and the other one is a damage. So really well done here by Now to make sure that he either moves the bosses into the bad one or moves them out, whilst the rest of the team moves in for those healthy ones, allowing them to just get so much extra damage on the group. Blade coming in here, swirling through the group right now as the tank stutter steps to make sure that it's reabsorbed by Captain Jolly. Rather frustrating mechanic, but more disaster here on the side of Limit right now as Troll goes down again. Death number 6 for them as they do clean up the rest of the trash. Does well not to release this time, so they're going to have to use that res again in just a moment once the trash is completed. More time lost for them as Captain Raoul now down to 5% for Method EU, and they will be finishing it up in just a moment, starting to move on to, I would guess, likely Trothak.
Yeah, I assume they're going to go on to Trothak, as we've seen them do in Freehold the last time around in the last tournament. It did have different affixes, but yeah, one thing to note here is that teaming Necrotic doesn't really prevent you from pulling a lot of mobs on top of bosses, because there's no bolstering or sanguine that makes it harder. Of course, the Necrotic can be trouble for the tank, but usually when you have so much to see, like a Ring of Peace come in, grips and typhoons and vortex from the druid, then the tank is able to kite as soon as his necrotic stacks go high, and this is why you can actually pull mobs on top of bosses, which we might see here later on Ludwig, as Ludwig is not a very scary boss, or mini boss rather, outside of pulling mobs on top of it.
We can see that now, of course, is running Dwarf, getting just having that Rachel in order to be able to clean some of those necrotic stacks. Well done defensively there by Mears to make sure to put down the Ring of Peace, as Now runs away to reset those necrotic stacks, which, of course, first time we've been seeing it today, folks. So just in case you're not familiar, that does mean per necrotic stack when you get meleeed, you will have 2% decreased healing. So at 50 stacks, of course, you just won't be healable, and it does add a minor dot component damage over time with that physical. So something that can get quite out of hand quickly on the tank, especially in this teaming affix where there's a lot of trash present. Nonetheless, on to Ludwig von Tortolan at 60% with the third reaping wave looming somewhere in the distance, unless they shadow meld it off. There it is right now. So the Risen Souls have come up. There should be some more coming in just a moment as they parade in from the right side of the screen, effectively and efficiently cleaving everything on top of Ludwig.
Yeah, so they proc their reaping with those neutral mobs basically, and we saw one nice thing as well from Method EU here, as Saelia was actually taunting Ludwig, just so Now can reset the necrotic stack before the reaping spawns, because once the reaping is there, of course it's going to be harder for him to reset the stacks, as he would have to kite away from Ludwig. But Sally just taunting Ludwig, and Ludwig is a very, very slow boss too. So you can taunt him from range, and you can have an easy time to reset your necrotic, and then now can taunt it back before Sally even gets hit.
Well, it's not too surprising that he's slow. He is a turtle after all, but about to fall here for Method EU. Limit now just working on their Council of Captains, about halfway through there, something that we've already seen Method EU complete and move over to Trothak from. Limit has proc their second Reaping, dealt with it on top of the boss equally, but they have now, I was about to say 6, but unfortunately as I was talking, 7 deaths on the board as Trill goes down again. I think that's his 3rd death of the dungeon right now. The battle res that just came off cooldown moments ago is used immediately on Trill, so fortunate for them that they had that available, because it is a tyrannical boss that takes a while. Huge trash pull coming in here for Method EU on the left side as they wait for the RP, the role-playing of Trothak to spawn.
Yeah, here's the value of the DK again, as you can see in the damage meters. So DK destroying this trash group here, just dying within a couple of seconds, really. So just insane amount of damage coming out of Method EU as they proc their 80% Reaping Wave, and they're going to pull it on top of Trothak here. Now, pulling a Reaping Wave on top of Trothak is actually not that easy at all, because there's a bunch of mechanics you got to watch out for, on top of having the smashes on the forward, on top of having the swirlies as they die. And then you also have the sharks, which, of course, the healer is going to deal with the sharks most of the time, but sometimes you might, as you can see right now, one of them actually jumped on Gingy on the rogue, and then it's going to be a lot harder to see the sharks if you have all those Reaping Souls on top of Trothak.
Max, of course, Unlimited getting bumped out there a few times from Jolly Saber. It was actually a bit scary. I was watching that. You can actually get bumped out of the arena and reset the boss too, so did well to kind of charge back in last second before the bosses chased him out to the edge of the arena there. Method on 79% here on Trothak, making sure to kite him in the blood pool just in case one of these sharks goes down right on the melee in this pretty much full melee comp, since Zelia is in there trying to get whatever kitty DPS he can as much as possible before needing to move out for the sharks. Doing no problem, of course, just to sit in there as we see the Dampen Harm come out of Mirrors, just to eat as much damage as you can during that Shark Tornado. It's a really melee unfriendly mechanics, and the boss just takes ages if you start to move out for that too.
Yeah, we see that they have their Lelas ready on Method to use that, but they're not actually using it. They're probably going to save it for the last boss, because this time around, we don't have an affix preventing them from pulling trash on top of the last boss. And we've seen it over and over again that these teams just wait for the boss to take more damage, wait for the bombardment to come in, and then they pull mobs on top of it, making use of this mechanic, basically damaging the mobs. So they're most likely saving their Bloodlust for this very situation, as Trothak at this point shouldn't be a big deal anymore, as only Ludwig's soul is alive here at this point.
Now, unfortunately, does get clipped by one of the Shadow Smashes from the Lost Soul from Ludwig von Tortolin. That is a 1-minute debuff that decreases your maximum health by 20%. Gingy equally eating the same hit during this Shark Tornado. Diff's quite low, but no proc on the cheat death, so still has that kind of buffer mistake that he could use later in the dungeon as needed, if he needs it. Hopefully he doesn't. Lost Soul finally falls here. Trothak, 37% for Method EU. Limit aggressively getting over to this area of the map. 60% for them as they've procced their 3rd Reaping Wave on top of Ludwig. I mean, it looks like they're doing pretty much the exact same pull pattern, more or less, as Method EU, but obviously just not to the same level. 7 deaths on the board for them. They're only now dealing with Ludwig, whilst Method EU is 1/4 health left on Trothak. Yeah,
it definitely did look like they have the same pull patterns, but, you know, this huge mistake coming in when they did this very big pull and they just had a full reset coming in, basically just cost them so much time, and then you also had a death at the start. It's like those single deaths wasting so much time if they don't have a battle rest available, then they just need to finish off the pull with 1 dead member, or they have to reset the whole pull and do everything again. It's just costing them so much time at this point. They're 1 whole boss behind. They're also 20% trash behind. So it's really all on Method EU here, as they have a very clean freehold so far with 0 deaths.
Yeah. And 7 deaths behind it on top of that. Trothak about to fall here for Method EU on the main screen. 1% left as he finally takes a tumble and keels over. The team immediately getting ready to go towards the bridge that will lead to the final boss, Harlan's Suite of the dungeon. Zelia kind of prowls in kitty form, gets over onto the bridge, whilst Method max tank goes down yet again. It looks like it's going to be another full team wipe with the amount of trash that's left. He can't release, of course, because there is that Enforcer present at the bridge right now. They don't have the battle res available. Used it earlier on Trill. Actually, I think both of them were used on Trill throughout the remainder of the map. They might be able to clean it up by the looks of it, as it seems Lip has the majority of the aggro on the mob, starts running away and resetting those necrotic stacks, while the rest of the group helps to root and peel off of him. Max finally does release as the rest of the team cleans it up, and they will be starting on Trothak. Method EU now pulling everything together right on top of Harlan's Suite, popping that Bloodlust and making sure to get this down as quickly as possible with the cannon barrage that's going to come in, because you have a bit bit of a finite health pool on that tank with Necrotic coming in.
You definitely got to watch out for all the mechanics coming out of this pool. Not only are you going to get knocked around from the boss's wind mechanic, but you also get the tank will get thrown around by the Enforcer. As you can see, the cannonball spawning right now, just perfectly kited by the tank here, killing all the mobs off as they get to their 89% trash. Now they're going to deal with Harling Suite a little bit here. They're either going to get the rest of the trash after the boss fight, or they're just going to get it at the very end of the boss fight to make sure they don't have to deal with the Reaping Wave.
Yeah, Limit, speaking of Reaping, has not procced their 4th Reaping Wave. They're sitting on 79%, 83% on Trothak. Finally have pulled it and recovered from the almost second disaster scenario there, but only their tank died, and they did manage to res it. 72% on the main board here on Harlan Suite for Method EU. The 3-phase fight, of course, we know at 60%, he will start to cast his kind of AoE cannonball on everyone in the group except for the tank, and the Wind Slice will also cast in a 360-degree direction. At 30%, he will take 100% increased damage and swing 100% faster on the tank. But you know, at that point, the boss is just going to keel over, even in this tyrannical environment. So once we hit 30%, they're just going to slice through them, maybe even pull some extra trash on top of it, knowing this team.
Yeah, this is actually a very impressive time of Method use so far, because if I'm not mistaken, their number 1 time trial time for Freehold was 18 minutes and 41 seconds. And now they're 15 and 40, and they're about to kill the last boss, and they're about to get the last percentage. It's not going to take them that much longer, so it seems like they're going to beat their own record here and actually get the fastest Freehold time, even faster than their own number 1 time trial time here.
Yeah, I mean, and then, you know, no surprise here, not even waiting for that 30%, just aggressively pulling more trash on top of Harlan and nuking it down with that cannon barrage coming in. The Irontide officer is still alive here, one of the more dangerous mobs, but really not a problem for the team, as now manages to squeeze away and reset his 13 stack of the Necrotic. Second barrage coming in will be able to finish off that officer. Mir's taking one of the clips there, but no danger to them as they rush back in with the Wind Slices going out, punting the group away from the boss. Harlan now at 43, Limit 52% on Trothak, has procced their 4th trash wave, but Max is dead again on the side of Limit. Sangra goes down as well. Looks like we're going to have a full team wipe in a moment here coming out of Limit, unless they manage to reset the boss, and it looks like they did not, actually. There is still some of the Reaping Wave available to them, so it's going to be a bit of a disaster scenario there, as Harlan is now reaching his final burn phase here for Method EU.
Yeah, Limit just disaster run for them. So many mistakes, so many wipes coming in, just no match to Method EU, as they have their Freehold clean run better than their time trials. They're on their way to kill Harlan Suite here, as they pull the last trash in for their 100% that they need. They just have to kill off this trash, kill off Harlan Suite, and they're gonna have their very best time in Freehold ever.
Fine. I mean, Painful Motivation comes in perfectly, helping get the trash killed on top of the Cannonball Barrage. Harlan Suite at 8%, 99% trash on the board. Just the, what is it, an Oarsman in there, still alive, about to be killed with this last barrage. Perfectly killed at the same time. 5th Reaping procs as Harlan goes down for an ab before this tournament started, so you can just kind of see the difference between the two teams. Nonetheless, both teams starting off here with that stealth right past the first 7 mobs and straight up into the top left, which, of course, Nergo, we know is consistent for this tournament.
Yeah, as Method EU is already pulling the boss here, they're actually changing up their strategy a little bit here. I don't think they've ever done this before, as they're pulling the boss plus both of the Acolytes on their side here, using the Bloodlust too, as they just kind of pull everything together here on top of the boss. Now, this is pretty difficult, because the very first boss that is engaging here, which is Solena, the first witch, she actually applies an aura to everybody, reducing healing down by 50%.
Yeah, but I mean, they don't care, because they have no health, right? So they just pop Bloodlust, pop all of their cooldowns right now, and Solena gets down to her first 50% phase 1 within, I don't know, 10 seconds, 12 seconds there. So they really get out of that aura quite quickly and go over to Sister Milady, making sure that they kind of hop around for that. Already now on Sister Briar, so they're about to complete their first phase, essentially, where you have to get each witch down to 50%, then you recycle that. By now, of course, the trash is well dead. Method EU sitting at a 5% trash on the board. Limit doing, ironically, what Method EU's older strat was, where we've seen a lot of teams do now. They're looking to proc their first 20% worth of Reaping and likely drag that into the boss, as one of the Vine Twisters comes out of the side there, one of the lieutenants. We can see it marked with that green triangle.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention earlier is that the Method EU, this is their 3rd cup, right? So they already prepared Waycrest Manor. This is the 3rd time they're preparing this dungeon. Now, they do have different affixes each week, but sometimes the affixes don't change the approach to the dungeon very much. If you don't have a bolstering or don't have explosive or anything like that that is very scary, then it doesn't really change the approach that much, and you can just take your old strategy and refine it a little bit. But now Method EU is just proving me wrong, as they changed up their strategy completely, so maybe it didn't matter all that much anyway.
That's all that matters to them, is proving you wrong, Nigura. Now, of course, we are in this this Raging Grievous setting here. Just a reminder, Raging means that the trash, which is already fortified, so the trash is innately more dangerous in this dungeon. It means that once they reach 30%, they will deal 100% increased damage. On top of it, Grievous, every time you dip below 90% health, you will start accruing an increasing damage over time effect, and you need to be healed back above 90% to get rid of that. So once again, a lot of danger coming in on the tank, and certainly the healer is very taxed as well, trying to make sure that everyone's topped healthfully. Azalea takes a bit of a hit there, dipping to 30%, but manages to back off and stay safe. We can already see the Ursul's Vortex coming in and a lot of crowd control on these mobs to help peel off of now the warrior tank on Method EU, making sure that those raging hits don't connect with him too much.
This was such an efficient pull by Method EU as they pulled the captains and guards from inside the corridor outside to those Solar Sense that they skipped at the very start of the pull. Now the Solar Sense have a lot less HP than these guards and these captains, meaning that they're going to go into raging faster than the captains. So they had to deal with the raging of the Solar Senses first, and once they were dead, the guards went into raging, and then they could use their CC to get rid of it.
And it looks like a bit of trouble here for Method EU as Max does go down. They have to use their battle res, but while he died, Lip unfortunately went down there, Unholy DK as well. So now they're struggling to four-man the rest of this boss. We see the cheat death proc in with that flash on the screen from Sangra right now. Trill about to go down as well. Just can't get rid of those jagged Tettles on him right now. So much healing is required from Jeeth, but just both, it looks like the Rogue's about to fall right now. Can't get out of the Grievous as well. The snowball effect of the aura on Sister Briar, plus the jagged Nettles, plus of course the Grievous is just too much to handle as they have a full team wipe now. Bloodlust not available, of course they used it earlier in the dungeon. No battle res available either, so once again, Limit in a disaster situation as Method EU has already dominantly gone out to the courtyard and made a pretty substantial pull.
Yeah, again, Limit just having those mistakes, having those wipes, messing up some of their pulls, especially those bigger pulls where they pull mobs on top of a boss, just not working out for them, just losing so much time as all the damage dealers lose their cooldowns. Of course, the bosses reset to full HP. Not all of the mobs died either, so just costing them so much time. Method EU already in this courtyard here, proc their Reaping Wave, on, pulling on top of some of the mobs in the courtyard, and once they deal with this courtyard area, they just have so much more space to kite mobs there and to make sure they pull mobs from the inside outside into this courtyard, so they make sure that once they are raging, they actually have space to kite them around.
Yeah, so doing really well here at Method EU. Just a very, very clean run, showing why they got that 17:27 time in time trials. Limit again, going at it for the second time as they get Sister Malady down past her first 50% and are working on Sister Bride to try and close out that first phase. But Method EU not stopping as they do a fairly substantial trash pull from the hallway leading to Rawl. I believe, I'm not sure if Gingy's already kind of done his sneak through and stealth and vanished in the boss room to make sure that all the doors are open. So nonetheless, if he hasn't, he will be doing that later to make sure all of the doors are open for Rawl's room once they get to it. Looks like they'll be proccing, or at least close to their second Reaping Wave here for Method EU in just a moment, and they'll likely be combining it, knowing them, with something pretty substantial.
Yeah, so the Athens here, especially on those mobs that Method EU is pulling right now, are actually pretty dangerous because of Raging plus Grievous. Now, some of those mobs do spit debuffs, as you can see on Fourty K currently, and their Mirrors, the Maggots do that. And then you also have the Thorn Shapers who cast a Disease on random players if it's not interrupted. And as soon as those mobs go into Raging, those debuffs are actually increased, as they do a huge pull with the mini-boss plus the boss here.
We actually saw them wipe to this, or almost wipe to this fully last week. They did a similar pull to this, and I think now dropped actually pretty quickly. I'm not sure what happened to Azalea at the time, but it looks like they've practiced it and are nicely well-versed in it. The 40% trash, the 40% Reaping Wave, excuse me, on top of Soulbound Goliath, the second boss of the dungeon for them, on top of the mini-boss with Matron Brindle in there as well. All of the trash is dead except for Matron Brindle, including the Reaping, so they've quite well stabilized at this point. We're in a fortified environment. Soulbound Goliath, not a very mechanically difficult boss, just gets an increasing damage stack for both the melee crush on the tank, and of course, once you try to reset that stack in the fire, it will pulse increasing damage on the group, making Zalea's life a bit harder. But because we're in this, because it's Prot Warrior plus fortified right now, Soulbound Goliath, I mean, maybe they'll reset it once, but they can sit in there for a long time and just face tank it.
It's very well played by Method EU, as you can see whenever the boss casts Thorns, Sally is actually going into cat form, because once you are in cat form, you're immune to the Thorn cast. Now, the mini-boss actually goes into Raging too, which needs to be dispelled by the Rasta Druid. And right before the mini-boss went into Raging, the Thorns came out. Now, the tank was taking a lot of damage because of the mini-boss plus the boss. But Sally, instead of healing the tank, tank, he actually went into cat form to be immune to the thorns, to make sure that once the mini-boss was raging, he could dispel it. Because if Sally was the one who gets the thorns, and then the mini-boss goes into raging, that would have been a disaster, and the tank probably would have wiped. So very well, like, peace of mind to make sure I don't need to heal a tank right now. I need to go cat form to make sure I don't get the thorns on me, to be able to dispel.
And Limit just biting off more than they can chew right now as they do a massive trash pull, and unfortunately the group just slowly dies. Grievous starts to snowball again. First the Rogue goes down, followed by Trill, and eventually a full team wipe again, putting them at 11 deaths on the board. The Raging Wind and the Vine Twisters was just too much to handle. The team getting Twisted Vines procced randomly all over the group just finished a lot of the members off, plus Jeeth was just having too much trouble getting out of that already accrued maximum 4-stack of Grievous, while Method and you all Sunshine and Daisies right now as they're at 15% on Soulbound Goliath, have now done a reset to make sure the boss's stacks are reset. No problem for Xaylia as he kind of edges to the side of the courtyard here, making sure to get away from those red human ghosts. Those will chase the highest aggro target. In this case, of course, it's the healer because of that healing threat. The tank can't do anything about that. They're not targetable, not tauntable. So the healer just kind of needs to run to the side. They will despawn after about 10 seconds. No problem for them as Soulbound Goliath does go down and Method EU heads over to Rawls Hall.
Are we going to see a 1 million DPS pull here? We will see. As we see now, using that speed potion to make sure that he is as fast as possible while he picks those mobs up. Now, he's actually going to go into this marksman room. This is the exact thing as we've seen from Team D from the eastern region, where they pull some of those marksmen on top of this, the piglets and the maggots. Now, this is a pretty substantial pull because there's just so many maggots and so many spit debuffs, as you can see on the whole group. But they actually managed to see most of the cast as you can by stunning them and knocking them back. So as long as you stun them when they cast the spit, then you actually don't get as many, and we only saw one on Xaylia, so very good control coming up by Method EU here.
Method EU getting close to that third reaping wave now at 54% as they kind of destroy the rest of that. A few of the maggots spawn, of course, from the infected peasants on the side. You know, Nagura maybe, to answer your question on the 1 million, they're 80 seconds away from their bloodlust right now. They're on the edge. Rawls' room is full of trash. They're on the edge of proccing their 60% reaping wave. Really wouldn't be surprised if they try to time it perfectly here so that they get their third reaping wave, run into Rawls' room, Bloodlust comes up, and they just go insane. We know Fragnance, you and I, very well at this point. He saw that, and he's like, I can do better. I want to do it better. Yeah. Let's do it. So we might see a really big pull coming out of Method EU here. Certainly the affixes do allow for it. We'll see exactly what they come up with as they're proccing their third reaping wave soon here. 56%. Limit not down and out just yet as they are working on their 40% reaping. Have jumped into Machen Brindle with 40% reaping on top of Soulbound Goliath. Another huge pull coming out of them, similar to the one we saw Method EU do. So very dangerous for the tank here. We'll have to see exactly how they manage to keep up. A lot of grave bolts going on the side.
I can just imagine the conversation in Method EU when Jimmy said, you know, guys, I want to do this huge pull too. I want to do a 1 million DPS. And then the rest of the team, no, this is not very efficient. We're going to do smaller pulls. But I really want to do 1 million DPS. As Method EU makes sure they're finishing up these marksmen here. And these are the mobs they actually pulled at the very end, usually. So usually they kill the last boss off, they talk to the NPC, they get ported to the entrance, and then they kill those marksmen. But this time around, Method EU actually chooses to pull them now instead of later, to not have this whole backtracking going on, which is probably why they had such a fast time in the time.
And of course, Xaylia, you can already see, snuck away, shadow melded, got the drink off, and here it is, 60% reaping wave right on top of all the trash in Rawls' room, now dipping so low as Bloodlust goes off, finally managed to stabilize. All of the mobs come in, huge amounts of damage coming out of the Unholy DK right now, trying to get over that 1 million, finally does break it. Everything melts and gets absolutely destroyed here, only halfway through the Bloodlust right now. Method EU showing that they can dance with the 1 million DPS, destroying everything in the room and almost proccing their fourth reaping wave as well. Very, very big.
We had the 1 million DPS by Frag DK coming out of Method EU here as they pull the whole room on top of Ral. Now this is so dangerous because of the raging, right? But as soon you saw that at the start, Gingy was the one who did so much AoE damage to Rogue, while at the very end it was Frag DK. And this is most likely because they were delaying Frag's cooldowns for a little while, so they made sure that his peak damage comes in when the mobs are raging, to be sure that the danger is gone. Because if you burst them down as soon as they go into raging, then the damage increase on them doesn't really matter to you. So this is why they had the damage delayed, and this is why this pull actually works out for them, and isn't a big danger at all. As you see, everyone is stable. Sally didn't need to use a lot of mana at all, and the boss is on 40% already.
Yeah, I mean, just really, really impressive, well-coordinated pull coming out of them. By the time the enrage graphic even went off on some of those mobs, they were already dead just because of the mass damage coming in from the Unholy DK. Defensive pop there from Fragnance, the Unholy DK. Speaking of which, just making sure he doesn't get too much danger as he does dip low with a hit there, getting down to about 30% health with already a rolling Grievous stack. Having just a bit of struggle with some of the spit debuffs. They have pulled some of the maggots, of course, from the kitchen, proc their 4th Reaping Wave, and are looking to cleave that on top of the boss and everything. There is a Rune Weaver in here. Rune Weavers are very dangerous. They are Lieutenant-style mob that pop up in the instance, and they just do an immense amount of damage to the tank, so Zayla's going to have to play well and make sure to get that Soothe off right away when it hits 30% and enrages, which should be momentarily here. Pouring some extra Wrath hits into it, as much damage as he can get out is a very important limit. Finally downing Soulbound Goliath now, 44% on the board, as they themselves also move in Ross Hall. So unless they do the same pull successfully, they are even further behind at this point just because of that massive successful pull from Method EU just a moment ago.
Yeah, Sally actually completely out of mana at this point as Rattle's on 2%, but Rattle is not a very... it doesn't do a lot of damage as long as you dodge all the mechanics, so they're totally fine here as they finish up the boss, and they finish up the Rune Weaver too, making sure they are out of combat here. As you can see, Sally actually already... This is very nice to see. As you see, Sally on the left already in cat form eating. So what happened was, he saw the boss about to die, he saw that no one needs heal anymore, so he went forward in the way that the group needs to go. He shut him out and sat down, was drinking before the group even got there, just to be sure that everything just goes a little bit faster. Even if it's only a couple of seconds you gain from this kind of stuff. This is what matters, and this is what makes Method U just so fast. Now they use their Shroud here to go down into the basement, actually skipping a lot of trash that we saw them kill in the past. Now they skipped all of it and just go down to the next boss room.
I believe they actually have enough trash to just complete the dungeon with the horrors before Gorak Tool, something that they'll skip at the very end and then backtrack with it, or just Shadow Meld the 5th Reaping Wave. So really efficient and effective coming in from them here, and they actually pull the boss right on top of the trash in here. Definitely a very aggressive play. You have to be careful because of the warding candles that go down. You can see that Ring of Peace immediately comes up to make sure that it bumps the mobs out, especially during that raging out of there. A lot of damage coming in again from the Unholy DK, no surprise there, especially as mentioned, ramping up during that raging. Raging, a complete non-factor for this team right now, as all of the mobs except for the Soul Charmer, the Lieutenant-style mobs, die. We could see that in rage graphing going up, and immediately that Soothe comes out of Zayla, making sure it doesn't do too much extra damage. Now doing well to get Lord Waycrest out of the way of those warding candles. They do decrease damage taken by 50% for all trash in it, so you want to get out of there as quickly as possible so that things die nice and fast. Limit dealing with a few of the pulls in the hallway as well, looking to proc their 60% reaping in just a moment.
Yeah, so what I want to think about Method U now at this point, because let's be honest, Method U, they're really far ahead. At this point, Method U can make a lot of mistakes to even lose this map still. So Method U already on the way to win this map, as we expected really from looking at the time trial times. But one thing I wanted to note is that most of those teams keep their strategies or a secret when it comes to time trials. None of the teams stream their time trials, none of them upload YouTube videos, just because they're important for the cup. And in a cup, you see those time trials maps, and they want to keep them as a secret as long as they can. Now, Method U had to show their strategy here for Waycrest because they were playing it in the very first map against Limit. But then again, like, who's really going to copy this strategy? Who's going to be able to copy it? Because there's so many huge pulls and so many crazy pulls and so much control that you need out of Method U. I feel like none of them even could copy it, even if they tried, unless they practice a lot.
Well, I mean, yes and no. Method EU, as impressive as their run is, they weren't the first people to do that raw pull and do the million DPS on the Unholy DK and have everybody gawk at the damage. That pull we saw actually initially coined in the East by one of the Chinese teams. I think it was Team D, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, it's something that certainly we've seen already. And the other thing to consider as well, some of these pulls can't be done depending on the affixes in certain weeks.
Yeah.
So, but they certainly pounced on the opportunity. Finally, now runs into Gorak Tool, pulling all the horrors with him. Looks like they're just going to kind of LOS or line of sight on the side, making sure none of them manage to jump up. Bit of damage coming in on now right now as Azalea manages to catch up. Bonsami's Bargain, Trinket did actually proctoring that raw phase, the cheat death trinket on the tank, so that wasn't available for 6 minutes, but has now just come up. So he has a bit of a safety net, huge amounts of damage coming in on him, dipping down to 7% health as Zayli just pumping as much healing as he can. A lot of raging coming out from these Gloom Horrors right now. Now doing well to save his shield all and all his defensives for this raging as a lot of the crowd control comes in on the group. You can see Zayli moving out of the group well, dropping that Ursul's Vortex, but now goes down and Frag goes down as well. Fortunately, they do have those battle reses available. Zayli needs to heal himself up. If he goes down, it's going to be a full team wipe, and he just doesn't even care about getting that battle res up right now. Needs to make sure he's healthy and top before moving on to Frag DK. That's a really good heads up play from him.
This is such a risky pull. As we pull those horrors on top of the boss, we've seen wipes wipe to the horrors alone without the boss. Now, the one very smart thing we've seen here from Method EU was Sally was actually standing on top of a latch at the very back, preventing the horrors from jumping at all. So the horrors were not jumping, they were just hitting the tank, but we know how much damage those horrors do to the tank if they're not jumping at all. It's kind of the same as in Atal'Dazar with those small little mobs that are jumping around. If you prevent them from jumping because their targets are not available to them, then they're going to hit the tank for a lot of damage. And this is why now just died. This is because all of those horrors were hitting him on top of the boss, on top of Raging, on top of Grievous. It was just too much damage to handle, but they did manage to recover. So they only had 2 deaths, they got the reses up, and they did manage to recover. They should be able to finish up this boss here. But yeah, this is a very difficult pull and very risky to do, as we saw just, you know, now dying.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you get your 17-20 or 17-27 earlier in the time trials. So a bit slower than time trials, of course. They had a bit of hiccup here, but Gorak Tool at 10% now, about to fall. Method EU about to make it 2-0 to 0 compared to Limit on the right side. I know you like that one, Sarah, as I can see you smiling already. But Limit just miles behind at this. Listen to everything I say, right, Titles? You know, Fourty K really turned a lot of things last week around for me. They really performed well, really turned things around, got the 3rd place. So I'm expecting to see a quite nice performance from them here. Yeah, but we did see Learn to Fly end up actually getting a higher seed inside of their time trial dungeons. So the addition of Revo Fevi might end up actually being just kind of the solution that they ended up needing. On the side of 40 K, we actually do see a pretty sizable pull on their end. They end up snapshotting a lot of those mobs to those Braziers there, making sure that they end up just teleporting on top of the Braziers to get like easy, like they're making them easy to interrupt, just grouping them up really quickly. And on the side of Learn to Fly, we're seeing them just kind of take it a little bit slower, kind of pacing out the pulls that they end up doing, and they're doing it towards the top end. Which is ironic because coming from Riva Fevi, he's known to want these really aggressive pulls right now. So perhaps he kind of saw the limitations that not only can come from him, but really the trash that exists and how dangerous it is in these dungeons, especially since the kind of aggression that he built himself up was known for was in Legion, and Legion dungeons were certainly a bit more friendly in the trash sense. 40K, we can see Rentari right now kiting and running away from these very dangerous Water Blast casts from the mobs as Wolf Disco dips quite low. No proc on the cheat death right now, but just some of the most dangerous trash in this dungeon is very front-loaded with these water bolts and casts going out on the tank, which is why you saw Rentari get aggro, snap everything on the Brazier, and just get the heck out of there, making sure he doesn't take any increased damage. 12% trash on the board for them, 11% for Learn to Fly, as both teams find themselves overlooking the Aquasphere platform in just a moment. Yeah, both teams also do a really good job here of killing the explosives, making sure that those do get DPS down very quickly is really important for both teams, just because they don't want to be taking unnecessary damage from the explosives while the tank does end up having to kite away. It also kind of limits your interrupts with the tank not being able to get his kickoff, and you do actually see a pretty good sized pull on the side of Learn to Fly and 40K here, as they're trying to like match, they end up matching count very similarly, even though there is like a 1% difference. Spellfly coming up from Rentari right now as he kind of yo-yos up and down the stairs away from the trash, just getting in, getting a bit of damage while he can, making sure that what he's doing there, of course, is he's baiting one of the casts, getting out of range of it before it goes off, meaning it will not actually connect with him, and then getting back in raise so that the mob can restart its cast, keeping them stationary. So nice little trick there from him, and well played to not move the trash around too much so that it's localized for the DPS to hit down. 20% Reaping has proc for them as they start the RP, the role playing on the Aquasphere platform, pulling the rest of the trash just above it, making sure it's of no danger to them. Learn to Fly, flying up right behind them. Yep, matching that, both of them popping a bunch of Lightfoot potions and running all the way down. On the side of Learn to Fly, you actually did see that explosive go off, getting the whole entire group pretty low, but it's going to be okay, as this pack isn't super dangerous for any specific DPS player. It's not like a bunch of unavoidable damage or anything. On the side of 40K, they did end up popping their Bloodlust here, and they are pulling all their trash into Aquasphere. Yeah, so again, just to remind everyone, we are now in a volcanic explosive setting, something that we haven't seen yet today. So volcanic means that there will be these fire plumes, or Tettle plumes as we know them, that go down on the ground occasionally, and if you stand in one, it will hit you for 50% of your max health. Furthermore, the mobs will, including bosses, will have a chance to spawn explosives around the area, which I'm sure you've seen these glowing orbs here on the side of Learn to Fly right now. If one of those casts does go off, it will hit the entire team in line of sight of it for 50%. So really important that you kind of babysit them a lot, Tettles. Make sure that they don't explode on the group.
Tettles plumes. Never heard it called that one before. 40K does have AccuSeer down to 70%, while Learn to Fly just a little bit behind. They do still have their Bloodlust rolling here for a couple more seconds, and they do have AccuSeer down to 74%. So it's really neck and neck here, as both teams are looking to pull a bunch of trash into AccuSeer. AccuSeer obviously not super deadly for the most part, as long as you're able to kind of dodge out that surging rush and not get knocked off the platform. Most of the time you should be okay. A lot of the mechanics aren't incredibly deadly for the team, so pulling a lot of trash onto AccuSeer is normally very profitable for the team.
Certainly don't want to pull a jack and get knocked off the platform at all. AccuSeer now down to 60%. You know, they're kind of keeping this 5% gap between the two teams, 5 to 6%. At 50%, we do know we'll enter that second phase as mentioned. We will have the kind of Aqualings, the 3 smaller versions of AccuSeer spawn in an equilateral triangle across the center of the platform here. It mimics all the same boss's abilities, but the danger here is that you have to have a player within melee proximity of each one of them, else you will start to get quite a bit of heavy damage accrued onto the group. Once you get through this phase, AccuSeer will resurface at about 10 to 15% remaining HP, and you can easily finish off the encounter there.
Yeah, and you also do have a mini-boss after AccuSeer that most teams will be electing to skip. The reason for that being is that the mini-boss ends up having a pretty sizable amount of health, so you'll end up running around or pulling those initiates, either shrouding or just just body pulling the initiates into the bottom a little bit of AccuSeer just to kind of get a little bit of free count, just depending on what your route ends up calling for. As you do see 40K end up dealing with those Aqualings, and you do actually see Edelweiss on the side of Learn to Fly walking up to those initiates, going to get as close to them as possible, body pulling them, making sure that she doesn't pull Windspeaker Heldis there.
Yeah, really well done by her to grab all of these initiates, bring them up to the platform so that they can be effectively cleaved down on top of AccuSeer. She rejoins the team up there. 40K now at 4% on AccuSeer, about to demolish the boss. They've actually caught up a bit Learn to Fly right now. That 5% or so is really kind of gone down for them. They've closed the gap, 3% on either side, almost 3% on either side, as 40K downs this magnificently designed boss. AccuSeer going down on the left side. What are you looking at, Tettles? As Learn to Fly finally downs there as well, immediately shrouds up. They do have the advantage of the extra shroud running the double rogue comp for Learn to Fly, and they head over right to Soren's room, one of the mini bosses that most teams opt to skip.
Yeah, so the advantage of the double rogue comp is, so Windspeaker Heldis doesn't have true sight until the mob is initially pulled, which is actually kind of strange because I don't think that most mobs aren't like that. Most mobs either have true sight or they don't, where Windspeaker Heldis has it after it's initially pulled. So that's something to note, that with this double rogue comp, they do actually get they get their skip through a little bit quicker, while 40K has to do a jump skip around the ledge, just taking it a little bit slower. So on the side of Learn to Fly and 40K, they look like they're mirroring pulls here, with both of them doing pretty sizable amounts of damage, with Lofus on that Death Knight actually doing 85k, while Dilemma is matching it with 85k DPS on the side of Learn to Fly.
Yeah, so a lot of damage coming out of that Unholy DK as we're used to with these larger pulls. So it's really kind of a battle of a lot of the utility that the Rogue brings. Of course, damage to boot, don't get me wrong, on the Rogue side, but they really need to play around this Unholy DK, something we've mentioned week in and week out, to make sure they take advantage of that AoE. 40K doing their skip here on the bridge and Learn to Fly. Moments later, we see the heroic leap landing. Nice view from our observers. They're really cool to see as both tanks manage to safely skip past the Lightning Elemental, that kind of danger we were talking about. Now, they have to pay attention here. Not only is there a lot of dangerous trash with the Water Blast that goes in on the tank, a lot of casts coming in from the Iron Hull Apprentices too, in the form of Whirlwinds, Area Denial on the ground Tettles, but we've seen a few of these initiates, as we can see on the side of Learn to Fly here. They run away in fear when they're low, they flee, and sometimes they can actually run up the bridge to the Elemental and pull it. We've seen that danger with some teams.
Yeah, so making sure that you're holding Ursul's Vortex, or making sure that you're also holding Ring of Peace, is actually very important. Actually, you do see Revo Fevi topping his group's damage, doing 100k DPS, Thunderclap 1, Thunderclap 2 here, and on the side of 40k, 40k ends up having an explosive ore going off, and Lazo gets incredibly low there, but it looks like they are going to be able to recover on the side of 40k with a very dangerous pull.
Yeah, that was pretty close, and just the power of Prot Warrior coming in. Who needs that Unholy DK? You have the power of Thunderclap coming in. Revo Fevi, of course, just flexing that muscle right there as he runs in, making sure to kill a lot of those explosives that plague the upstairs areas. The initiates did come downstairs for the rest of the team. A lot of explosives coming out of this trash, unfortunately for them. A bit of RNG, of course, involved with that. Somebody has to babysit those, else the group can easily wipe. 40k now, 49% trash on the board. 49% 49% apiece, actually, as Learn to Fly finally goes up to 50%, getting ready to move towards the kind of dual council boss in just a moment. I'm going to see if I was just going to say, I'm curious to see if they do a really aggressive pull right on top of the boss. There's a lot of babysitting here needed. These initiates need to die very quickly to get rid of those explosives.
Yeah, just making sure that you do get those initiates down, like you were just stating, is very important. So just like the cleanliness of pulls is what has propelled Learn to Fly to actually pass 40K in this section of the map. Making sure that all the mobs are just grouped up for prolonged periods of time, and making sure that you're just able to DPS down the mobs evenly. Actually, you do see Rentari go down inside of 40K. They are going to elect to use a battle res, and they are going to be looking to pull Brother Ironhole and Galecaller Faye here in just a couple seconds.
Brother Ironhole and Galecaller Faye now at 79 and 58% apiece for Learn to Fly, moving well along with this boss. Unfortunately, needing Kite out of that swiftness runes that Faye drops on the ground. It will increase your haste and speed by 25% for everything, both players and enemies included into it. But a tornado sweeps through it and downs Drastic right now as the Windwalker goes down. Dilemma getting bumped in the face there as well. Fortunately, no proc for him in terms of that cheat death, but they were forced to use their battle res just like 40K had done earlier, so kind of puts the teams more neck and neck again as Drastic is battle resed on the side of Learn to Fly. There's getting a little good morning kiss there from that tornado coming in. They did, of course, have the debuff from the Slicing Blast as well.
Yeah, maybe just some morning jitters there. You actually did see the Swiftness Ward coming down. The tornado just kind of sweeps straight through the Swiftness Ward, ends up hitting Drastic and Dilemma. Drastic getting hit twice by the tornado, and then does eventually end up going down. You see actually everybody dipping incredibly low on the side of Learn to Fly here, but it looks like they are going to be able to recover as Edelweiss does end up healing them up. 40K here pulling the last couple of initiates into Brother Ironhole and Galecaller Faye, getting just pretty efficient cleave. Where on the side of Learn to Fly, they're actually electing to just kill Galecaller Faye as quickly as possible, and then just deal with Brother Ironhole almost solo.
Certainly the safer strat, but the less DPS efficient strat. I was just kind of giggling to myself there on the side of 40K. They had one of the explosives spawn up on the edge there. So we're seeing Learn to Fly the side here. Edelweiss does run downstairs and pull some of the trash. There is an explosive far in the distance, as we can see, but it's well out of line of sight of the players. But as the trash kind of collapses on top of the group, they're going to have to be really careful to not have an explosive go off. One does go off once again. They are line of sight, but now that everybody's on the same Z-axis platform up here, you want to make sure that you're getting the interrupts in, not only on them, but of course on the Galecaller apprentices as well. So a lot of damage that could come in here for the team, but Brother Ironhole, not too dangerous and is now down to 15% health. We're getting that AoE fear come out of Revafevi just to make sure he gets an interrupt, temporary as it is, on the rest of the trash. 40K, again, with that more DPS efficient strat, is actually starting to catch up a bit. They're at 58% trash on the border titles, and Faye is down with Ironhole at 17.
Yeah, I think we kind of understood why Learn to Fly ended up just DPSing down Galecaller Faye very quickly there. We actually did see Drastic run off screen there for a second, then transcend back, pulling a lot more mobs into Brother Ironhole by himself right there. You will actually see one of these mobs with this Deep Sea Ritualist end up getting DPS down, and then the whole entire group on side of Learn to Fly is probably going to end up popping their Lightfoot Potion and then looking to Shadow Meld off this whole entire Reaping set on the bridge here. As the side of 40K, they're probably going to be looking to mirror this in just a second.
Yeah, so the 60% has been popped. They run right up to the bridge, as we see commonly teams do. Shadow Meld in just a moment, as Titles alluded to. There it is, getting rid of not only the trash that they pulled, but the Reaping as well. 40K just a bit behind, looking to proc their 60%. They're doing a more traditional, if you will, pull along with the Enforcers and Ritualists. Very dangerous pulls, a lot of damage that comes in from the tank here. As you can see, Rentari has procced that, popped that shield wall with those 3 spinning shields around him, slowly backpedaling to get away, but Lofus unfortunately takes a blast to the face and goes down. They do have the battle res available and will opt to use it because a wipe at this point in the dungeon is absolutely disastrous. One of the casts does go through from the Ritualist. You can see the Shadow Bolt debuff on the players right now. Want to make sure to interrupt the next one, else you will take increased damage every time. Learn to Fly has already just safely moved up to the bridge, started the double tentacle pull. They want to get 80% trash here before moving to Volzith's room, and around the time that they engage Lord Stormsong, we'll see exactly how they choose to do their fourth wave of Reaping skip.
Yeah, and you actually do see 40K end up popping their third wave of Reaping here. They are going to be looking to Lightfoot Potion and run away from it. As they do end up having some of the Reaping Souls ending up running in, just kind of getting close to them. We need to make sure that they actually do get pretty far away before they end up popping that Shadow Meld, as the Reaping does have a pretty large tether range. On the side of Learn to Fly, they're ending up doing the Cultist pull. They ended up dealing with those tentacles, and we have seen some teams elect to pull both of these Cultist packs into one another, but that is actually a pretty scary pull, even though it is very time efficient. But on the side of Learn to Fly, they're just kind of taking it slow. We do know it is an explosive fix, so there is a lot of babysitting that needs to be done. So making sure that Learn to Fly does take the little bit more safer approach to this pull, as it looks like 40K is posturing to pull 2 cultists into one pack here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not mad at the safety that Learn to Fly is playing, but they're certainly not that ahead right now that they can start to play it safer if they're not used to doing that in their practice runs. The real danger comes from these depth bringers and these caster packs. They already dealt with the more dangerous one that composes of 3 depth bringers and only 1 cultist, and that's because of their Void Bolt cast along with Rip Mind on the tank. So a lot of interrupts that are needed to go out and the explosives to boot. So they're dealing with the easier of the 2 pulls right now, Learn to Fly, as they chewed up the rest of the bridge. 40K, once again, making that riskier pull, something that hopefully does pay off for them in their eyes to try and catch up here, because they are a bit of trash percent behind, don't have that res available, and are 1 death on the board up.
Yeah, but they ended up skipping that tentacle pack. So they actually got a little bit more percent that we did see on the side of Learn to Fly before they ended up before they ended up running onto the bridge here. And the reason for that being is they did not want to end up pulling that tentacle pack because, I don't know, they might have deemed that the tentacles were too much health or it cost them too much time for an inefficient pull where they could just do the double enforcer into one another. As you do see, 40K and Learn to Fly ended up dealing with their packs here. We actually did see Edelweiss run off screen there for a little bit. She looked like she procced the RP on Lord Stormsong to allow him to get pulled very quickly as soon as they are done dealing with these Abyss Dwellers right here.
Very cool to see both teams at 76% dealing with the first round of Abyss Dwellers at the exact same time. They'll both get to about 78-79%, so they'll just be shy of their 4th Reaping Wave. Well calculated, as we see commonly the teams do here. Now, some teams opt to kind of proc their 4th Reaping Wave, Shadow Meld it off, and then do Lord Stormsong, whereas Learn to Fly is doing Lord Stormsong first, will backtrack slightly, proc their 4th Reaping, and then Shadow Meld it after. 40K doing the first strat that I mentioned, dealing with their Reaping Wave, and then Lord Stormsong. So very, very neck and neck from these 2 teams right now.
Yeah, so Learn to Fly ended up, like I said, Edelweiss ended up proccing the RP for Lord Stormsong. He ended up spawning a little bit faster. 40K just saying, all right, we're going to wait. We're going to do both Abyss Dweller packs and then Shadow Meld off the Reaping, and then we're going to proc Lord Stormsong whenever we're dealing with the first Abyss Dweller pack and not backtrack at all. So Learn to Fly is going to have a little bit of backtracking, which is super time inefficient, but I think it might end up being just a little bit better, as Learn to Fly is just slightly ahead of 40K right here. You do see Edelweiss actually getting mind controlled from Lord Stormsong, as she does have. So Lord Stormsong ends up doing a mind control, and you end up having to soak all the balls, just DPSing, and then you have to get the mind control target to 50% to be able to break them out of the mind control. We see a lot of teams end up popping Shroud or other immunities in order to not be able to deal with it, but unfortunately, Learn to Fly ended up getting unlucky, and Edelweiss didn't end up getting that mind control on her. You
got to play those cards, and you got to play the cards you're dealt sometimes. Just didn't work out for them. 25% gap between the 2 teams right now as 40K is about to hit 50% on Lord Stormsong. They're playing ball right now and circling around the arena, making sure they don't get hit by these orbs floating around the area. Each one fixates a player, of course, if you get touched. Massive amount of shadow damage and a stun that you certainly don't want to deal with. Team doing well to stay grouped up together so that they have a clean space behind them as they slowly kite the boss in a circle. Learn to Fly pulling just a bit ahead, of course, as their second round of cooldowns has come up. Kind of finishing off Lord Stormsong here, 5%. They're already starting to drag him to the edge of the arena because, remember, as we mentioned earlier, they do need to backtrack and get over to the Dwellers that they did not kill in order to proc their 4th Reaping and to try to skip that, allowing 40K the time needed to try and finish off Stormsong and head over to Volzith's room.
Yeah, but Learn to Fly is just a little bit ahead here, even with Lord Stormsong being at 23% and them having to deal with those Abyss Dwellers. Learn to Fly is just slightly ahead. There also is a 1 death differential if it does end up getting down to that 5 second scary point. There's also something to note between the 2 composition differences. The Outlaw Rogue traditionally is a little bit more single target damage than the Unholy DK, but the Unholy DK does have access to battle res in case their healer did end up going down. And on a fight like Volzith, that's actually incredibly scary for your healer, as the Promises of Power debuff ends up reducing your healer's HP by a pretty significant amount.
I mean, write your titles, but I hope these teams aren't playing around their healer dying, you know. So certainly they have that safety net, but I assume they're not playing it just for that reason. Both teams now going for a little underwater swim as we see that disgusting aquatic form coming out of the Druid titles. I know you're in love with it, but sorry, just not on board with that one.
Love it.
Now, of course, if they touch any of these jellyfish on the side, immunity or not, you will get stunned for 8 seconds. Edelweiss, of course, heard my call and warps right out of that awful aquatic form into a beautiful night elf form as they swim up through the water, getting ready to pretty much avoid all of this trash. I do believe they've melded, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't get to see, but they will try to avoid all of the trash and circle around the edge of the platform towards Volzith in order to start the encounter. They will deal with the trash during the transition because of that promises of power debuff that Tettles mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and you actually do see 40K end up pulling some of the eels here. So most teams end up electing to pull the eels after Volzith ends up getting pulled, and the reason for that being is the promises of power debuff ends up giving a pretty sizable amount of damage to your healer, while your healer really doesn't always want to be in melee here because he can get some of those shadow debuffs on him if your tank has to end up kiting. But his dots still do a pretty sizable amount of damage just from Sunfire and Moonfire, because Sunfire and Moonfire is pretty low-hanging fruit for Resto Druid DPS, and it's really easy to apply to all the eels, and you don't have to be in melee, and it doesn't risk you end up dying. But you do see on the side of 40K, they end up pulling those eels, just getting one pack, and then you do see Learn to Fly electing to skip, going to come back and pull them with that promises of power debuff, allowing their healer to do a lot of damage, as you do see Learn to Fly phasing Volzith here.
Volzith finally phased indeed as Learn to Fly, dealing with their two separate phases. We have the healer and the tank in one phase dealing with one of the sunken dwellers there, whilst of course the octopus, the caster dwellers, are for the 3 DPS phase upstairs, waiting to interrupt the forgotten denizens as quickly as possible. Not as quickly as possible, excuse me, but milking it rather, and waiting until the very end to interrupt it at the last moment. If one of those casts get off, it will be do a fair bit of damage, shadow damage to the group, as well as heal them to full. Of course, we are in a situation here where Edelweiss, or both healers, will have a 9 stack of that promises of power, meaning their maximum health is decreased by 90%. So even the slightest sneeze on top of them will cause them to die. We're seeing some of the eels pulled here for Learn to Fly on the left side of the screen. 40K dealing with their transition phase and getting ready to deal with the trash as well. This is a pretty substantial trash pull coming in here for Learn to Fly.
This is actually a pretty scary pull, because Riva Fevi ends up having to tank the eels right on top of the denizens, because you do actually have to make sure that you get 2 melee kicks apiece on both of these forgotten denizens, because their cast is pretty long in general. I think it's about 8 seconds, so you do have to have 2 melee kicks on them, and then you do have the eels on top, so Riva Fevi has to make sure that he's in melee of them the whole entire time. You actually do see him starting to kite away just the last couple of % on those mobs, and it is a fortified setting, so we are looking to see both groups ending up two-phasing this Volzith, so they should be looking to pop their Bloodlust and DPS down Volzith from 71% on the side of Learn to Fly and 69% on the side of 40K respectively, and DPSing it down to 0 as quickly as possible with this Bloodlust. Getting another intermission phase could definitely spell disaster for one of the teams if they both end up making it all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, with how close they are together, certainly a second transition phase for this boss would be absolutely detrimental to them. Learn to Fly at 43% on the board for Volzith, and that pull actually, with how close these teams are, they put them pretty substantially ahead, relative at least, to where 40K is right now, getting the eels in on top of the dweller, of course, on the side, or the 3 denizens on the side. So really big pull coming in for them as 40K is at 92% trash. Volzith now 20% on the board for Learn to Fly, looking to finish it off. 40K trying to keep up and just surpass them if they can. They are behind at this point, +1 death on the board. They just hit their 20% mark, and it's going to be a wild scramble at this point for trash.
Yeah, Riva Fevi gets incredibly low as they had an explosive orb ended up going off. So Volzith, the manifestations of the deep end up exploding explosive orbs, and we actually did see their melee Dilemma and Dad end up having to run out of melee range of Volzith to end up dealing with those explosive orbs. So it was actually incredibly close on Volzith's intermission cast, as you do see the last pack of eels being pulled on the side of Learn to Fly here, while 40K ends up dealing with Volzith as well, but they are they need 8% on the side of 40K, while Learn to Fly only needs 4% here.
And part of the issue is the eel packs that they had to pull were completely opposite sides of the room, and it's just going to be too little too late here for 40K as Learn to Fly. With a pretty text for the tank, you're going to accrue a lot of those anti-healing stacks essentially for the tank. So we've seen tanks dip too quickly, too fast, get out too late from the trash. So we'll have to see what they do. We see the dwarf being run here from Riva Fevi, actually both sides wanting to take advantage of that Dark Iron Dwarf racial, getting rid once every 2 minutes, so I'm not mistaken, from those necrotic stacks.
That's actually really important, because they ended up having to use their swap, changing Riva Fevi from Night Elf to Dwarf, and instead they did not have Dilemma be able to swap from Rogue to Unholy Death Knight. While it's not like a super big compositional thing, it might not be what they ended up practicing for the time trials. With Dilemma, actually, he ended up playing this Unholy Death Knight during the time trials, so maybe they ended up going back and maybe practicing the double Rogue Freehold, but we're definitely going to be seeing some differences between Learn to Fly and 40K here, just because of like how Dilemma is going to end up playing, just because the differences between Rogue and Unholy Death Knight's power.
Speaking of differences between the two teams, we can see the mass amount of damage coming out of the Unholy DK for this first. Similar pull from both sides, but Learn to Fly trying to supplement that by using their Bloodlust early, so they were not going to have that available for the boss in this tyrannical dungeon. And the first boss, especially with a non-Eudora week, which I don't think we are. I think we have Jolly and Raoul for the Council of Captains. In my opinion, is probably the hardest boss in here. Just massive one-shot potential, so having that Bloodlust available, and especially pushing that first phase to 75% so that there's not too much splash damage accruing on the random melees. You can see some of them chunking down to 40% randomly is going to be pretty crucial.
That's actually super bad for the side of Learn to Fly. They ended up blowing their Bloodlust on the first trash pack of the instance and ended up still killing it slower than 40K just because of the power of the Unholy Death Knight coming through. You see his, he just does massive AoE just because of how he ends up stacking up the mobs inside of his Death and Decay and making sure that he does get a lot of damage from the Festermite stacks. And on the side of Learn to Fly, they're just a little bit behind on Sky Captain Crag too because of the unavailability of this Bloodlust for them.
So 40K, of course, forming a bit of a square here around the boss, making sure that one of the sides is open in order to direct any of those front aiming, bursting flame shots, pure fire damage towards the healer. So hopefully they have a bit of good luck. Both teams have a bit of good luck and not take too much of that splash damage. But if anybody else in the group should hit it, hopefully it's the tank, as they could take those hits a bit better than the rest of the DPS. This is really where a lot of the one-shot potential comes in. Parrot coming down in a very unfortunate position for 40K, as the team does well to move away and not be hit. But, you know, a lot of the death situations in this map really lie in getting combo tettle. So you have something like the Parrot Poop coming down at the same time as one of the frontals goes down. Somebody's not paying attention, the bird swipes right through you as the frontal goes in. So certainly a lot of heads-up play is needed.
Yeah, or you just get hit by the bird, get knocked out of the arena, and then instantly reset the boss like we did see in East Weekend last weekend. Just making sure that you do end up dodging that bird or don't get comboed, like Sloot was saying, is very important. On a 19 on Tyrannical, Sky Captain Crag with his Azerite pistol shot gets you incredibly low. So yeah, just getting hit by any other additional damage just gets you super low. You do see Edel ending up baiting that bird guano very far, and then she actually does get nicked by that Azerite power shot, but it's going to be okay. On the side of 40K and Learn to Fly ended up kind of bridging the gap here on boss DPS just because of Outlaw Rogue being significantly better than Unholy DK on single target. We talked about how good Unholy is on AoE, and it's very good if you are able to pull a lot of trash into a single target fight, as they do get a lot of damage out of it. But just Outlaw Rogue on pure single target, like the bottom most of Sky Captain Crag is just where Learn to Fly ends up making up this time right here.
Bird is the word, as a lot of guano rains down on the arena right now, and exactly the combo we were talking about. The poop comes down, and Rentari eats a face full of hot flaming lead, the pure fire damage, so it's a bit tough for the tanks to mitigate. You just don't get the armor component in that, so the combination of the two sources of nature plus fire damage were just enough to knock down the tank. Fortunately, they do have that battle as available, not going to be available now for about 6 minutes or so, but it could be a problem coming up in the dungeon later. This is actually where we saw Limit earlier have a lot of struggles, just because there's so much trash density with teaming, plus already high density from Freehold itself, and on top of it, we're going to have the Harpooners combined with the Necrotic stacks.
Yep, and as both teams end up running through that Enforcer, they end up shadow melting it off just to let it reset. Not a really efficient pull. On the side of 40K, you do see them running down the bridge here, and just looking like they're sapping and setting up for a big pull. As the side of Learn to Fly, they end up running, pulling a bunch of the mobs here, and then they're doing a pretty big pull with this Vermin Trapper.
You know, I was pointing to you, Tetos, because I love that observer view across the bridge right now. It looked like the kind of Fellowship of the Ring adventuring together to Mount Doom across the bridge. So really cool scene there from there. 40K running in, aggressive pull coming in out of both teams, defensive Ring of Peace coming up on the side of Learn to Fly, making sure that they can clean the stacks of Necrotic on Revifevi right now, as he kind of stutter steps out of the traps from the Vermin Trapper right now. Don't want to be caught in those. Not only will they root you in place, but deal a pretty substantial damage over time component. 40K following suit right now, dealing with their own set of traps and Ring of Peace.
Yep, just making sure that you do get as many resets as possible, just due to the Dwarf Racial and the Ring of Peace is very important. That's where we saw Limit and Method EU kind of have a little bit of differences. We did see Now getting like a lot of resets just via his Dwarf Racial and the Ring of Peace, where we did see Max getting like harpooned back or just accidentally getting too many stacks, not getting a good reset with his Ring of Peace. So making sure that on the side of both teams, getting the reset on Necrotic is very important.
Very, very important. Learn to Fly now, kind of on the cusp of proccing their second Reaping at 38% right now. Both sides actually at 38%, so really neck and neck back for them. Once again, you know, it's starting to be the same story as last map. 1 death on the board for Fourty K, just 1 death difference between the two teams. Learn to Fly maybe just slightly ahead. Fourty K has moved over to the neutral trash, similar to what we saw Method EU do. They will be proccing their 40%. Now, whether or not they combine that with trash or the boss for the second reaping, we'll see in just a moment, but we can already see that Wolf Disco has kind of faded into the background. If I'm not mistaken, he's back now, but he did get some tricks of the trade ready for trash, so it looks like it'll be an aggressive trash pull along with the second reaping, something Learn to Fly has done as well. Revolted dropping quite low, though. A lot of necrotic stacks coming in, and stacks as well from the Risen Souls, so a lot of babysitting needed as finally the Ring of Peace goes down. He tries to sit in the middle of it and get some thunderclap damage, but is slightly out of melee range of the mobs right now.
Yeah, and the Ring of Peace and the Pheromones keep Revolted alive. We actually can't see how many stacks of necrotic he does have, as Lazo actually gets incredibly low there. We can't see how many stacks of necrotic he has because he does have that beer debuff. So basically, you end up having to get a debuff from a mob for the RP event for the council fight here. So we actually can't see how many stacks that Revolted did end up getting, but they did end up resetting it with Ring of Peace, and he ended up just spiking back health-wise.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for him. I have that beard debuff myself quite often. But they finally run right into the Council of Captains here. So Captain Jolly and Captain Raoul are the two active ones this week. Eudora is largely toted, or teddled, as the most...
That was a reach.
That was a reach. All right, I'll let that one go. But she is coveted as definitely the most dangerous one of the Council of Captains. So a bit of a breather here for the teams, as they don't have to deal with her this week. But they do have to deal with the irritation, of course, of the barrel smashes coming in from Raoul, that you want to get away from the pulsing, and this incredibly irritating saber that comes in from Captain Jolly and is only reabsorbed once it reaches his hitbox, kind of letting tanks teeter on the edge of it, making sure that you don't get hit by it. Super frustrating. But, you know, there are a couple tricks you can do just by sitting at max melee range and allowing the blade to reabsorb into the boss.
Yeah, so generally groups will be ending up looking like to kill one of the council bosses very quickly and then just kind of DPSing down the other one. But that's not super damage efficient, as we do see on the side of both teams. They ended up trying to just cleave them both down evenly, like we did see on Brother Ironhole and Gale Caller Faye in their most recent map. Just making sure that you do have the efficient DPS on 2 targets, and you actually do end up absorbing. So you do end up giving this, the boss ends up throwing beers onto the map, as you do see some of the small circles that you did see on Learn to Fly's side. They end up giving you a buff. You either get critical strike, you get haste, or you get like a dot, which ends up dealing damage back to you. And so the groups end up knowing what buff ends up being thrown at them, and they're grouping up, stacking inside that small circle and getting a damage buff, and then they end up using it in order to be able to DPS down the bosses very quickly. You actually do see about a 10% 10% differential on the bosses from the side of Learn to Fly versus 40K here.
Yeah, so really important to play well around these good and bad brews. It's quite key to the success of this fight right now. 40K just slightly behind, still has that 1 death on the board. About net 10% of the averages of the 2 bosses' health behind Learn to Fly right now. Learn to Fly looking to close off Captain Jolly first, as he hits 5% on the board. Captain Rule at 10% respectively. 51% trash on the board for Learn to Fly, and 58 in favor of 40K. So 40K with a bit of an advantage, perhaps evening it out with the trash, but we'll have to see. That's something you can easily make up on a teaming map with a very aggressive pull. Typical Shroud coming up from Learn to Fly as the second boss dies. They rush over to the Ring of Booty right now, getting ready to squeeze the hog in the middle of the arena as 40K downs the boss in just a moment.
Yep, and you actually did see one of the rogues end up running off at some point in order to be able to proc the RP, so that the group could walk up, ending up clicking Lightning the Pig there, and just ending up dealing with this RP event very quickly. As you did see Learn to Fly end up dealing with it. So the difference in trash can actually be made up very quickly depending on how Learn to Fly ends up dealing with the RP and how long it ends up taking Trothak and Ludwig von Tortolen to spawn in between the events. So making sure that you're able to make the most out of your time and merge pulls into one there, and make sure that you don't end up having to do one full trash pack difference in order to make up that just couple percent that 40K does have over Learn to Fly is very important for the success of this dungeon.
Yeah, playing around the downtime with the RP, not as much for Ludwig spawning, because Lightning has kind of pre-spawned by the teams, but really Trothak is going to be key to the teams, and when you proc the Reaping and what you combine it with. So we can see well on the side of 40K here, they already were at 58% at the end of the boss, easily proc their 3rd Reaping and dragged it right on top of Ludwig von Tortolen as he throws out his first shell on the side of the room. Want to make sure to avoid those incredibly fast-moving shells that bounce around the room. Very easy to get hit by them, especially if you're a Moonkin. Now, 40K leaving the rest of the trash on top of von Tortolen, not pulling anything too aggressively with it, But Tettles, I do expect that they're going to down it, and we'll see a fairly aggressive pull that'll be at least nearly proccing their 4th Reaping that we see most teams do.
Yep, and you do see Rentari jumping out, trying to get a reset on his Necrotic here, and you actually do see Igloo end up taunting Ludwig there just for a couple seconds, so Rentari didn't end up getting meleeed by him. And you did actually see something similar on the side of Learn to Fly. They ended up popping their Ring of Peace. Edel ended up taunting Ludwig off of Rebuff Heavy as Ludwig doesn't get affected by Ring of Peace, and just so that both teams' tanks ended up getting that reset of that Necrotic. You do actually get the Reaping spawn on the side of Learn to Fly, and they are cleaving it down with Ludwig here. And for 40K, they end up being about 8% trash difference ahead of Learn to Fly here.
Yeah, so it's really starting to come down to the wire. We're at the 3rd boss here. Trothak's going to take a fair bit. Let's see exactly what 40K manages to do. They do rush up to the side there, past the Etten, getting ready to do a pretty substantial trash pull. 70% on the board. They pull the Etten with it, actually. I'm not sure if that was intended or not. Usually teams kind of don't bother with that one. But nonetheless, big trash pull coming up here along with cooldowns for 40K. Trying to proc that 4th Reaping Wave whilst Trothak spawns in the background of the dungeon. The 3rd boss of this Freehold dungeon. Learn to Fly, not nearly as aggressive of a pull, and I don't think that's going to be enough to proc their 4th Reaping, but they decide to opt for a different route, pulling Trothak on top of the trash that they got.
Yeah, so that's a little bit more damage efficient, while on the side of 40K, they do end up pulling that big Ogre, and so the reason that most teams don't end up pulling it is because it's super melee unfriendly. He spawns a circle around him that you normally have to get out because it does a pretty sizable amount of damage to all the melee, so it reduces their uptime by a significant amount, and you do actually see Lofus end up getting beaten by the tank on that pull. So real question mark right there. And you do see them end up propping their 4th Reaping of the instance, pulling it into Trothak though. On the side of Learn to Fly, they're looking like they're going to be about at 70-ish% into Trothak, and maybe they'll end up proccing their Reaping into it. I don't really expect them to, but they could potentially.
I mean, we've seen it happen during the boss. There's a lot of downtime on Trothak. Certainly he has dangers to him with the Sharks if you get caught out of position. The Sharks can actually kill you very quickly, and the Shark Tornado can kind of deal its own substantial amount of damage. But otherwise, you avoid these fairly easy mechanics to avoid, and then you're just kind of sitting around doing nothing a lot of the time, except just smacking the boss. So you want to combine it with some trash and make it a bit more dangerous and take advantage of it. Rentari getting a few clips here on the right side from the Shark bouncing around. They have popped their Bloodlust, so they won't have availability later. It's just about to go off here. It's about to fade. You know, Tettles, I was thinking with that kind of Ogre Etten that they pulled, perhaps they wanted to pull it on purpose because it will spawn a larger Lost Soul health with their Reaping Wave, which could benefit some of the single target from players. So perhaps it was on purpose, as we see Ludwig's very high health Lost Soul finally dipping to around the 15% range. Will die well before Trothak keels over. Trothak now 50% on the board for both teams, but 40K has the 10% trash advantage, has dealt with their 4th Reaping Wave, but they have 1 death on the board.
So something that's also very important to know on the side of Learn to Fly is that they're not all 5 Night Elf. Rebuff Heavy has been running that Dwarf in order to be able to reset Necrotic on him. So them not getting their Reaping here into Trothak is actually going to be pretty... It's going to be pretty bad later on because they're going to actually have to end up dealing with it, and we're going to end up seeing what they end up dealing with it on. Whereas on the side of 40K, they're probably just going to end up running straight into Harlan Sweet, getting their last little bit of count over there, while Learn to Fly has to end up dealing with a little bit more of their count. Ludwig von Tolen's Risen Soul, which has a ton of HP that they're going to end up having to deal with in this Reaping pull as well. So just... It's going to be very rough on the side of Learn to Fly here, but both teams are very close here.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty close. You know, a lot of it, I think, is going to come down to the efficiency of cannon play on Harlan Sweet on the last boss, so we'll have to kind of hold our breath. Don't hold it for too long, Titles. And we're going to have to, no, stop it. And we're going to have to see exactly what they deal with. We saw a very efficient routing from Method coming out of that just earlier in the previous series. A lot of the cannonball damage very effectively and efficiently being pulled on top of Harlan.
That's actually something I didn't think of. So pulling all of their Reaping onto Harlan Sweet might end up being able to where they are able to catch up on the side of Learn to Fly, as they are able to get like that Risen Soul of Ludwig von Tortolan, just allow him to take a significant amount of more damage from those explosive blasts from Harlan, just because that mob does have a ton of HP, because basically 50% of his health is converted into the Risen Soul. And even though it is a tyrannical setting, he does still have a ton of health. As you do see both sides ending up downing Trothak here in just a couple seconds, as 40K does end up running towards that very end of the instance here.
Yeah, so 40K getting ready to go past the bridge, likely to see a Shadow Meld come out of them in just a moment, as Rentari does a cheeky little jump over on the side of the bridge, uses his Heroic Leap to get past the Etten and Trash Pack that plagues the end of their bridge. Learn to Fly using one of their 2 shrouds, so an advantage that they they have here. They're able to kind of shroud safely past the beginning of the bridge and the end of the bridge should they want to go straight over to Harlan. But Lofus, unfortunately, does have, I think, have to die here. He wasn't able to get the skip. They don't have the shroud available. He doesn't have his own mobility like Rentari did to be able to jump over. So he might have wanted to save the Shadow Meld for later, or maybe didn't have it available. Nonetheless, he does fall over, mistake or not. They do get the res off. Quick Fish Feast goes down. 2 deaths on the board for 40K as they get ready to go. But Learn to Fly getting right into the thick of it. 71% on the board. Harlan Sweet has been pulled, and Bloodlust has been popped.
Yep, this is where actually that double rogue ends up coming into play here, as you do allow to get both shrouds all the way through, and allows Revolted to not end up having to die. And like you said, they end up pulling everything into Harlan Sweet, doing a very big pull here with the Bloodlust, ending up DPSing down, getting those Enforcers hit by those explosive blasts in order to allow them to take damage from Harlan Sweets. It's just like a very efficient cleave, and you do see Revolted getting incredibly low. As a side of 40K, they have pulled Harlan Sweet as well and have him down to very similar HP pulls as the side of Learn to Fly.
Rev getting up to that 25 necrotic sack. Really hard to reset with a boss that cannot be crowd control and Enforcers that can only be displaced. So once that Ring of Peace wore off, he just had his stacks refreshed. Fortunately, he did have his Dwarf Racial available, so he just kind of got rid of his stacks without reset them down. And we can see a lot of these Risen Souls from their 4th Reaping Wave coming in on top of the boss, looking to aim it and cleave it down with that Cannon Barrage as the team slowly backpedals and getting as much efficient cleave out of it. So once again, we're pretty much neck and neck with the two teams here. The 4th Reaping Wave has largely been dealt with here for Learn to Fly. 80% on the board. 40K has 80% on the board trash as well, and is actually 2% behind damage of Learn to Fly on Harlan Sweet because they did not have that Bloodlust available. So this one's going to be really close. But keep in mind, folks, 40K has to win this by at least 10 seconds because of those 2 deaths.
This is going to end up coming down to how efficiently can you end up cleaving Harlan Sweet by comparison to the Reaping and the rest of the mobs. On the side of 40K, they do end up having a little bit less single target damage just because of Lofus on this Unholy Death Knight, but they're going to end up pulling a lot more. They're going to end up pulling a little bit more trash into Harlan Sweet here in a couple seconds whenever they do get a lot of those Cannon Barrage spawns. And on the side of Learn to Fly here, they are at 80%. They are 80% count, same as 40K, but they do end up having 1 pack less in this part of the instance in order to be able to pull here. So we're just going to have to see how the teams end up dealing with this Cannonball Barrage and how they end up efficiently using it in order to be able to do the work for them.
So some of the danger really coming in here from the Reaping on top of the boss we saw in the form of Undead actually getting hit by 2 of those green swirlies that spawn when the Lost Souls die. Those decrease your damage and healing done for 30 seconds by 10% per stack. He did proc his cheat death out of it as well. Fortunately, had Cloak of Shadows to get rid of that debuff and not incurred too much damage penalty for those 3 seconds. But a bit of vulnerability and a bit of hiccup there from Learn to Fly. In the end, not too costly, just because rogues being rogues, they were able to kind of get rid of those abilities and squeak by without the deaths. 40K now, 89% trash on the board, has dealt with the initial trash pack in front of Harlan Sweet that Learn to Fly is not able to yet. Learn to Fly has pulled ahead on Harlan Sweet here, about to enter that burn phase at 30%. But it looks pretty close, Tettles, but the trash advantage for 40K might really pay off here.
But the trash advantage might not actually end up being that much because the painful motivation from the Ravagers ending up doing a lot of your bidding in this instance because they end up DPSing down the mobs for you. They put a debuff on all the mobs, making them take percentages of their health over time, and they ends up killing them. So Harlan Sweet ends up being about 10% lower on the side of Learn to Fly, and this is actually going to be a nail biter here.
But keep in mind, with the size of the pull that they did, Rev getting so low right now, can't reset his necrotic stacks as he leaps away, but the officer is just non-crowd controllable right now, does not have his racial available, down to 4% as Edelweiss struggles to heal him up when everything is just going haywire here on the edge of the map, has backed himself into a corner and is just ramping up necrotic stacks yet again as he runs through it and finally goes down. They do have the battle res available, but aggro is going to be all over the place right now as Edelweiss takes a huge hit. Fortunately, they managed to down most of the rest of the trash as Edelweiss runs to the corner, gets the battle res off on Rev right into a cannonball. Undead does go down. Unfortunately, did not have that cheat death available that earlier had procced with poor play in that Reaping Wave, whilst 40K now, 3% left on Harlan Sweet as they demolish the rest of the trash with a cannonball barrage and finish off the match to tie it 1-1. Ooh. There's a bit of advantage, if I'm not mistaken, for Unholy DK with Bursting. They can pre-anti-magic shell, so they're actually usually pretty good about surviving it, but certainly not in the face of having the double rogue with the amount of utility and advantage that they bring. Nonetheless, Learn to Fly, rushing right down to their large pull, along with the side pack on this. So double Matron in here. Bloodlust has been popped, making sure to babysit those explosives. The ones on the side down there, hopefully they're out of line of sight of it, and indeed the Bursting starts to accrue on the team here. 40K, a bit more timid of a pull right now, as they don't pop their Bloodlust, but also don't pull the second side of trash. Dilemma, unfortunately, getting hit by the Savage Cleave from one of the matrons.
And he ends up being okay. He does end up proccing his cheat death, which is actually not what you're looking to do. But the side of Learn to Fly actually does get incredibly low. Revo Fevi ends up going down. You obviously released here right here at the very beginning of the instance, but this double matron pull just begins to be super scary on the side of Learn to Fly. 40K ends up pulling this bridge pack, and it looks like they're ending up pulling it into this mask here.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, Learn to Fly getting a bit of advantage right now in terms of the trash amount, but at what cost? Dilemma now has a 6-minute CD on his cheat death, can't have that for 6 minutes. Rev did die as well as proccing his cheat death trinket, not available for 6 minutes again. So just, you know, I'm not sure if the cost was justified the means there. Titles, we'll have to see. They are looking to do the mask group right now. Dilemma dipping quite low as they get in right to the pack. 14% on the board for that team, looking to likely proc the first Reaping Wave on top of Elderly Axa, something that 40K will be looking to do as well as they deal with a matron pack on top of the mask. Pretty substantial pull coming out of them here right now.
Yeah, but 40K not having like a Shadow Melt stop for all the Reaping coming onto Elderly Axa might end up being a little bit different in terms of how Learn to Fly ends up dealing with Elderly Axa. The reason for that being is you can actually Spell Reflect the Blood Bolt back to Elderly Axa, which is actually very challenging to do if you do have like a full stack of Reaping on top of you, because if you accidentally end up reflecting the Grave Bolt or something like that, your tank might end up going down very quickly as opposed to on the side of Learn to Fly. They end up having a little bit easier of a time dealing with Elderly Axa with the just couple Reaping mobs.
It's not even the Grave Bolts because it was a randomly targeted on the team. It's more so the Risen Souls that apply their damage over time of max health component to the tank that usually you just Spell Reflect one of those. They apply so frequently and then you're just missing a huge chunk of damage that would be either available for that mirror, the Blood Effigy, or of course for the boss themselves. Blood Effigy has now spawned here for the side of Learn to Fly. 60% on the board for that. Does equal amounts of damage to the boss. Those Blood Bolts incredibly deadly as they finally get chunked down. An Elderly Axa down to 50% for Learn to Fly. 40K with their own side of issues now dealing with the rest of their first Reaping pack. Bloodlust is running for them, and Elderly Axa down to 50% as well. First Effigy is down for them too.
Yeah, this is actually pretty bad on the side of 40K. You saw the mobs all being super spread for prolonged periods of time, but they end up actually dealing with these the Reaping okay. You actually did see on the side of Learn to Fly, Rev ends up kiting away from the Reaping, able to get that Spell Reflect onto that Blood Effigy. You ended up seeing it die from like 55% health just to 0. So that ended up being super good, and we actually do see both teams very neck and neck here.
Yeah, really neck and neck. Really well done by both teams so far, and so equal down to the point that one of their rogues, each one of the rogues has a cheat death proc, as we saw Lofus proc it earlier, that dangerous max pack. Now, we're about to finish off Leaxa here. 20% on the board for Learn to Fly. Second Effigy about to die here as the next one spawns for 40K, so a bit more single target damage here in the favor of 40K, who has now gotten past Learn to Fly on Elderly Axa, down to 10%. We're about to go into what we see actually, Titles, you and I have talked about this a lot. A lot of teams really struggle with the trash in Kragmaw's room.
Yeah, so basically you're going to end up having to pull like a lot more trash on like the back half of the instance because you end up having to skip a lot of these ticks just due to bursting. So basically whenever the ticks die normally, they end up exploding, doing a pretty sizable amount of damage to your whole entire group. But because it is bursting, you can't combo those two together because it will end up killing your whole entire group. And you do see on the side of 40K, they end up pulling 3 Lashers, and it looks into like a 3 Rot pull. So basically these Disease Lashers end up needing to have their cast kick by 1 melee. They do end up actually pulling a 4th Lasher in, as it doesn't end up doing anything just as long as your tank and all 3 of the melee can end up coordinating kicks onto these Lashers.
Yeah, I mean, you just need 1 per Lasher, really, and of course, it does put out a disease that stuns a player for a substantial amount of time that absorbs a ton of healing, but the disease can be dispelled by the Windwalker, the monk, that something either side has available to them. So it shouldn't be too much trouble, even if 1 leaks Decaying Mind, 1 well interrupted there on the skull target by 40K. But keep in mind, bursting, something that the first time we've seen it today, so just to go over that for a moment, we do have every time a trash mob explodes, not the bosses, just the trash, will give you a temporary dot, a 4-second damage over time shadow component based on maximum health that can, of course, roll very quickly. So oftentimes you have healers very frustrated with their groups that don't stop their damage appropriately, and they just get a ton of bursting stacks on the group, as we're seeing right now on the side of Learn to Fly. A lot of damage coming in on Rev and Drastic, the 2 rogues unaffected, likely pre-cloaking to make sure that shadow damage does not hit them. Pretty substantial pull coming in here for Learn to Fly right now as a few explosives go down. 40K holding their own on the right side as well, making sure to delete all the explosives that come up and get everything down at the same time so that you don't roll those stacks too much.
Yeah, you actually did see a pull inside of 40K with a double Feral Bloodswarmer pull. So basically whenever those Bloodswarmers do get pulled, they end up fixating a target, walking up to them, meleeing them, doing a pretty sizable amount of shadow damage. Those mobs are some of the scariest, so pulling 2 of them together was actually a very big pull on the side of 40K, and it will allow them to do Kragmaw's room just a little bit quicker, as we did see Learn to Fly end up separating those 2 pulls out together. We do see Revo Fevi popping his Lightfoot Potion. He looks like he's going to do a pretty big pull here as he does traverse into Kragmaw's room.
Speaking of double Pharaoh Bloodstormer, here they come again. Green and blue marked on the screen of Learn to Fly. They fixate members, as Tettle said. A lot of damage coming in, and shadow damage nonetheless, as Drastic takes a big hit from them, but he's not the one that's even fixated. That's Edelweiss and Undead right now. Revafevi getting a lot of damage coming in right now. Explosives going off. Revafevi down to 3%, does not have his Cheat Death Trinket available, and he does go down. Edelweiss immediately getting the battle res up. Double fixate on Undead as he starts to run away from the rest of the group, along with the second Reaping, but it's just too much to handle as Sonic Screeches go out left and right from those Bloodstormers and finish off the rest of the group. Learn to Fly with a full wipe on the left side. 40K slow and steady through the rest of the trash right now at 50% and 0 deaths.
Yeah, that is very bad on the side of Learn to Fly. They end up having just 2 Sonic Screeches, which are the cast from the Feral Bloodstormer, go off at the same time. Most of the time, the Sonic Screech isn't too scary as long as it doesn't end up locking your healer out. But we did see it end up, we did see the whole entire group getting super low on the side of Learn to Fly just because they ended up having explosives go off, or they end up having too many stacks of bursting. And then just the 2 Sonic Screeches going off simultaneously ended up wiping the whole entire group after Revafevi did end up going down, even while Ring of Peace was out. On the side of 40K, though, they're just chugging along, making sure that they end up doing all these pulls cleanly, making sure that they're getting that maggot cast interrupted. So basically, whenever the fetid maggot there does end up casting, it casts a frontal cone, and it ends up doing a ton of damage to the whole entire group if it does end up hitting somebody. So making sure that you're either moving away from that cast or interrupting it with something like paralysis, gouge, maybe a stun from between the eyes or something like that is very important, as you do see 40K ending up proccing their 3rd Reaping of the instance, pulling it into Kragmaw, making sure to stomp on those, stomp on all of those larva, sure, from Kragmaw, just making sure that doesn't spawn ticks on the whole entire group.
Tentacles. Tentacles.
Almost.
I don't know why I called you tentacles, but let's roll with it. Kragmaw down at 80%, so really dangerous pull that coming out of that 40K team. You know, we see a lot of teams do this kind of 3rd Reaping on top of Kragmaw. Kragmaw having his 3 basic abilities. He has the frontal on the tank, of course, indigestion, ton of shadow damage, has the charge in the direction of a player, but the most dangerous is the tantrum that we're seeing right now on the side of 40K here, running around the room, pulsing tons of physical damage onto the group. Resto gets so low there on Igloo on the side of 40K, manages to heal up the rest of the group. Now, all 3 of these abilities do spawn those larvae or tentacles on the ground, apparently,
yeah.
That you do need to stomp before they become full-fledged larvae and run around on top of the group. The group's being composed of predominantly melee, pretty much all melee, along with the Restodra that runs in with kitty form and slashes the claws around. Can kind of afford to stay in the middle of the room and not have to bait that charge into a wall, because they can move as a group and stomp while effectively DPSing.
Yeah, but something to note about the tantrum itself is that the explosive can actually spawn on Kragmaw while he is end up doing that tantrum. So making sure that you actually see the explosives, calling out super early, and running around killing the explosives while having to stomp on all those larvae is very important, as we actually have seen 40K do a pretty good job of it overall. Learn to Fly has engaged with Kragmaw with their 3rd Reaping of the instance, and they do have Kragmaw down to 90%, while on the side of 40K they do have Kragmaw down to 40% here.
Yeah, I mean, that full wipe from Learn to Fly is going to be a tough mountain to climb for them. 35 seconds extra on the board that they needed to win the dungeon by, not to mention that they're half a boss behind on probably the most dangerous boss in this instance on Tyrannical. Certainly a very front-loaded danger dungeon in terms of just both bosses and trash, really. 40K now down to 30% as they have Kragmaw against the wall here. One of the blood ticks did spawn, but they do well to kind of finish it off. One charge goes into the wall, and they will be getting ready for what will likely be their final tantrum. Should they get another one, they can commit to it, but this is a bit too high. They do have to deal with the proper mechanics here before committing to finishing off Kragmaw.
Yeah, so since both groups do have a triple melee composition, Kragmaw in these tantrums actually slows down their DPS by a pretty significant amount, so making sure that you get as few tantrums as possible is super important. You actually do see Lazzle end up popping his Touch of Karma on Kragmaw in order to be able to reduce his damage taken, as you do actually end up seeing 1 blood tick coming in on the side of 40K, putting a dot on Rentari. 1 blood tick, not super scary. If you end up having a bunch from just not stomping on the larva, it ends up becoming kind of spooky, but it's going to be okay. On the side of Learn to Fly, they do have Kragmaw down to 54%, while 40K looks like they are going to be killing him in just a second.
Yeah, 40K is just maintaining this half-boss lead because of Learn to Fly's wipe earlier, finally stomping the rest of the larvae for the takes here, and moving on to the Guardian and Death Speaker trash coming up, with, of course, everybody's favorite, you know, Hazard Spaghettis and Nope Ropes and Danger Noodles and what have you. The entire Pastor Brigade coming out on the side of 40K as they combine both Death Speaker Guardian packs on top of one of these Danger Noodles, making sure that you either Spell Reflect the Wicked Frenzy coming out of the Death Speaker that goes onto the Guardian, or just stunning through it, and you want to get that Soothe out of Igloo as well. So a lot of damage coming in for the group here, and a lot of bursting that's about to hit them as well.
Yeah, you actually do see Rentari end up having one of those stacks on him. It looks like it did end up getting dispelled off by Igloo there. So making sure that, like you said, you end up spell reflecting it back onto the Defiler or the Death Speaker, and end up just making sure that you do get it dispelled off you if you do end up getting meleeed is very important, because that actually does a ton of tank damage, especially in a bursting setting where your tank could end up actually going down. You actually do see the on the side of 40K, they end up using Ring of Peace in order to be able to kite these reanimated Guardians while ended up kicking their shield. While on the side of Learn to Fly, they have Crack Mod down to 23%, just a pretty sizable amount behind. That was actually a pretty big pull on the side of 40K.
And very, very well done. The DPS was very patient and very well coordinated. They stopped every 3 to 4 bursting stacks, didn't finish off mobs, and made sure to not get too crazy if a roll going. 40K really aggressively pulling both Defilers that guard Sporecaller Zancha, the third boss of the dungeon, making sure that you have at least 2 melee interpretation per Defiler for both the Withering Curse and, of course, the Shadow Bolt volley that goes on the group. The totem cast that goes down is largely avoidable. Just let them cast it, move away from the totem, don't get hit by it. Easy peasy there. Spirit Dane Totem, we can see both coming down there right now as Rentari does move away from that, unfortunately eating one of the dots that he dodges. Not a big deal, but once they proc these, once they kill these 2 Defilers that we're seeing here right now, they will proc their 4th Reaping Wave and cleave it down on top of Sporecaller Zancha, who is approaching that 100 energy cast.
Yeah, but something to know about the Spirit Drain Totems isn't necessarily that, like, you end up having to just, like, walk away from them, but Rentari ends up not being able to get his frontal cleave onto all those mushrooms, so basically you end up needing to make sure that you do get the shockwave on the mushrooms in order to be able to clear it off. But they end up using Rogue Cloak of Shadows in order to be able to kill the mushrooms, so they were able to actually do a more efficient pull. You do see them proc their 4th Reaping of the instance into Sporecaller Zancha, as you do see the upheavals coming out on both of their rogues here, making sure that they efficiently get them in order to be able to knock both of those mushrooms out. And you actually do see Lizelle end up using his Ring of Peace in order to be able to bump one of the caster mobs into melee.
Yeah, just so many Grave Bolts casting on the side. You want to just have melee in there cleaving as much as possible instead of peeling off and interrupting in the distance. So well bumped by him there as Upheaval finally comes again on top of Wolf and Lizelle. They run out, making sure to delete as many of those fungi on the side as possible. Learn to Fly with their own substantial pull of Guardians on the side. A bit of damage coming in, a bit of scariness coming in for the Windwalker, and of course Revafevi, the Prot Warrior as well, but do manage to get stabilized by Edelweiss there as they kill the rest of the Guardians, proc their bursting stacks, and head over to do what will be the similar or same pull as 40K with the 2 Defilers on top of Zancha.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of things mirrored between these 2 compositions and these 2 teams between just over the course of all 3 series, but something that we haven't seen mirrored was the big wipe that we had on the side of Learn to Fly that has put them significantly behind here in this instance. So making sure that they are putting themselves in a position to allow 40K to be able to mess up is actually pretty important. So they're just still playing their game, they're still chugging along. They actually ended up popping Bloodlust on Sporecaller Zancha, which is actually something that we didn't see on the side of 40K. 40K likely saving it for Unbound Abomination whenever you do end up pulling that with Reaping, but Learn to Fly ends up dealing, just kind of determining that the Reaping into Sporecaller Zancha with those 2 Defilers is actually a little bit more scary, and it is a little bit more beneficial for you to be able to pop Bloodlust there. So it's just a little bit difference in preference here.
Yeah, a bit of a scary moment there for Learn to Fly. Fortunately, they had their Bloodlust running as it either a Shadow Bolt volley got off or an explosive got off, but the entire team did get chunked down to half health as Dilemma takes a fair bit of damage, manages to get the Disease Dispel, but Disease on the entire group now as one of the mushrooms was not soaked. Their 4 members have the Disease dot tick through. Revafevi managing to get a bit healed up by Edelweiss there before dipping to 30% health. Sporecaller Zancha on the main screen here for 40K, down to 2%, about to be downed as they dodge the final round of Disease Balls essentially flying around the screen right now. Immediate stealth comes up from the Rogues, immediate Shroud comes up from the Rogues as Rentari pulls it's not an Abomination.
Corrupted Horror?
No, it's not a horror either. It is a, we'll see in a second, it is a Corruptor.
Faceless Corruptor, okay.
Close enough, tell us. But the Corruptor gets pulled on top of the Defiler, of course, with the Guardians and the Death Speaker, cleaving everything down together, trying to get to that 94-ish or 96% worth of trash, depending what they want to do, if they want to pull the 2 Corruptors at the end with one of the Danger Noodles. But Defiler, the most, probably one of the most dangerous mobs in this pack, immediately gets killed before they pay attention to anything else.
And we do actually see Rivafevi and Drastic going down on the side of Learn to Fly, while Sporecaller Zancha is at 44%. They end up using the Bloodlust on Rivafevi, but they end up not having Drastic for the bottom 40% of this fight. And this spells disaster for Learn to Fly. If they had any chance of coming back, it would be off the back of a 40K mistake. But at this point, it seems like that just might be a little bit more out of reach. Every mistake just puts them further and further out of reach. For DPSing down Sporecrawler, Zancha is going to take them a considerable amount of time, while 40K here dealing with this pull very well. They're looking to pop their Shroud here in a second and end up pulling those Corruptors into that Danger Noodle Hazard Spaghetti Pasta Factory.
Pasta Factory, that's a new one. But I suppose you need 2 or more for that to happen.
Ooh, that's a good point.
One of them. 40K grabbing these 2 Faceless Corruptors, bringing it over indeed as the final round of Spores. Plagues learn to fly. A lot of damage going up in the form of the diseases as well. Edelweiss certainly has her work cut out for us. Zancha hits 23%. 40K now, 93% on the board. Will be killing the Danger Noodle in the middle, and then afterwards the 2 Corruptors will be enough to get them up to that 100% trash, which they will then hug the this kind of webbed wall that we see in the background here, allowing them to port down to the 4th boss, along with the Reaping, which I presume titles they will aggressively pull into the boss.
Yep, making sure that they do have their Bloodlust available for them is actually very important. On the side of Learn to Fly, they ended up blowing their Bloodlust on Sporecrawler Zancha, ending up having a 4 DPS, and that puts them even more behind than they were previously. So this is just very bad for them, as 40K does end up DPSing down these 2 these 2 Corruptors, and they are looking to get their last Reaping of the instance here.
And Dilemma kind of emergency runs through the mushrooms there. Did not have a cloak available, I suppose. Procs cheat death on purpose, just making sure that the cast, the harvest, of course, does not hit the entire group for extra damage over time from the remaining mushrooms. 40K heading downstairs now finally, as the 5th and final Reaping wave will be joining them in a moment. We can see all of them gathering there in the middle. Unbound Abomination, final boss of the dungeon, has been pulled. Bloodlust has been popped, and everything is just getting cleaved down in a frenzy of thunderclapping right now, and Blade Flurry, making sure to point the breath from the boss to the outside of the room so that they have a nice circular kite pattern around the room, away from the ever-increasing amount of spores.
Yeah, making sure that you actually don't put that on the wall is actually very important, because it does end up bouncing off the wall, and then it can kind of land wherever. So making sure that you are getting it positioned in a way that doesn't end up actually just kind of killing your group is super important. On the side of 40K, they end up grouping up, they end up getting that debuff clearer out, and they're just making sure that they're stacked up inside of it, and they're going to be moving as a group for the rest of the fight.
Yeah, so they kind of find themselves just in a bit of a corner here, but they do manage to kind of sidestep to their left, of course, our right from the back of the boss directions. Tettles, you know, all that's a bit difficult for some people depending on which direction you're looking at.
Hold on, I'm holding my hands
Put those
up.
hands down right now. 40K pulling into the corner of the room as the next Vile Expulsion comes out, making sure to kind of stutter step as much as possible, Learn to Fly, trying to hold their own and keep up with everything as they down the large Guardian pack, deal with their bursting round, and are only now moving over to their double Faceless Corruptor plus Danger Noodle pull. 40K here, 66% on the Unbound A-Bomb, have dealt with their first round of those Blood Effigies.
Yep, so basically whenever the Blood Visages do end up spawning, obviously the Unbound Abomination's health doesn't end up moving, but whenever his energy does get 100, he spawns 2 of the Blood Visages, and it does a pretty sizable amount of damage. So it does 33 per 2, so it ends up doing a pretty sizable amount of damage to him, and it ends up just making sure that you actually end up having to DPS him down, and you can kind of tell his HP just kind of by his energy bar.
And unfortunately, Learn to Fly learning to die yet again, as another what looks like full team wipe will be coming up from them, once again biting off more than they could chew, as they almost fully wipe, but half wipe to the double Faceless Corruptor pack right before the trash. Fortunately, Edelweiss managed to kind of squeak out the side there and get that res off. Unbound Abomination now 32% as we go towards the final spawn of the 2 Blood Effigies here for Unbound A-Bomb, as 40K looks to try and close out the series 2-1, but Tettles, there's just no way they can lose at this point.
Yeah, the pheromones were not powerful enough for Revofevi, unfortunately, as Learn to Fly did end up having a full group wipe here. And 40K here just making sure that they are closing it out, making sure that their healer doesn't end up going down. That would actually be like the only way that they're able to end up wiping at this point. Their healer would have to die, and they'd have to have some catastrophic demise here.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they would. but that's not going to happen right now.
No,
as Undead A-Bomb finally gets one more breath off, and we're all just kind of on the edge of our seats right now. As the Blood Effigies, we can see those blood spurts spawn on the side of the room. They go out, our neighborhood-friendly construct runs in and starts killing these 2 Blood Visages on the side, and 40K with a very clean run, very dominant performance here for the second map, cleans up the series 2-1, and Jack
the left here. The Augur and the Confessor want to end up being DPS down very quickly, while you don't want the Juggernauts to be bolstered too much, because if they end up for some reason getting a charge off, it could end up killing people, or the Honor Guards with their Fervent Strike ends up being super scary as well. You actually do see an 8 mob pull on the side of Team Puolukka and something mirrored on the side of Abrakeydabra side, making sure that they don't end up pulling that Confessor. The Confessor, you don't want like 2 Confessors in this pack here. You do actually see Puolukka though popping the Bloodlust Warrior on the side of Abrakeydabra. They end up electing to not use it.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra, I believe, did a little bit of a smaller pull as to seat one of the mobs there in the back. You can see it's an Augur who actually got the seat here, and the Confessor did not get pulled in. So a little bit smaller pull, one less mob on Abrakeydabra side. They're also saving their Bloodlust. Maybe that is the reason why they can save it, just because they did one less mob, one less caster basically having in this pull. And you see Team Puolukka, but both teams pretty much doing this pull very well and clean, not having any deaths whatsoever.
Yeah, but the difference is that Bloodlust being able to be used. As I was noting, the Augur and that Confessor are super high priority in order to be able to get killed very quickly. You actually do see the Tricks of the Trade ending up coming on Divine Field, and then it allows those swords to get snapped straight to him. He actually ends up getting a little bit on a higher ledge than we actually have seen from the side of Team Puolukka, in order to be able to get those swords just like pixel and pixel, in order to be able to get them DPS down a little bit quicker. And that's just a small optimization as they do proc their first reaping, and they look like they're going to be pulling it into Razan here.
Yeah, Team Puolukka is struggling a little bit with the bolstering here. As you can see, those... Oh, and they pulled another pack on top of it, which means they are... Oh, no, sorry, that was not, but that was actually just the Risen Soul. So it was the Reaping mobs who obviously don't bolster, as they're not getting affected by any of those affixes. But yeah, Team Puolukka are a little bit ahead in trash, because they did have one additional mob there in this first pull, and some more swords in the second pull, while Abrakeydabra already on their boss now, and they do have their Bloodlust here, as they didn't use it in the very first pull, so they can catch up on boss damage here compared to Puolukka.
Yeah, something also to note on side of Team Abrakeydabra is they end up actually pulling some of those small dinosaurs into Razan in order to be able to make use of the Rogue's keep your wits about you trait. So basically it allows them to convert 2 target damage into a pretty considerable amount of single target damage. That paired with their Bloodlust ends up putting Razan at 55-ish% health, while we do see on the side of Team Puolukka they're having the Reaping inside of Razan here, and Razan is at 80% for them.
Yeah, Divine Field has this nasty dot here on him that the Razan does, basically. Other than that, the boss is not very scary. He does do an AoE fear. All you have to do is hide behind anywhere that is line of sight, and then once in a while he will fixate a player. Now, what those teams do usually to bait the fixate on specific targets is you have 3 people stand directly underneath the boss and 2 people stand outside, and then one of those 2 people will get the fixate on them. Usually they will bait it on people who have their Shadow Melt or their Vanish ready to get rid of the fixate completely, to just get more damage overall. Now, if you get rid of the fixate by vanishing, Shadow Melting, anything like that, that means that the tank will get hit instead. So because this boss has this dot that does a lot of damage, you want to make sure that the tank actually has some sort of defensive ready if you Shadow Melt it. That's why they don't use it all the time. Yep,
and you do see Elsrad end up cutting it back as the 2 Sky Screamers have been pulled into Razan on the side of Abrakeydabra. They're doing a really good job of making sure that they are efficiently cleaving down all the mobs in order to be able to kill them evenly. On the side of Team Puolukka, they do also have the Sky Screamer plus a couple of those reanimated dinosaurs that you do end up pulling from those purple circles there on the side of Puolukka, just trying to get a little bit more efficient cleave from the Keep Your Wits About You trait from the Outlaw Rogues.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra finishing off the boss and finishing off the Sky Screamers are in 25% trash now. So actually ahead of Team Puolukka at this point, because they did kill a boss, they're in 25%. They have to finish off one of the Reaping Souls here, which is actually going to cost them a couple of seconds. And every single second matters, right? So I assume it's because of the Shadow Melt, not the getting rid of all of them, not outgrowing one of them. Now, so they go to the right side here. As we've seen in the past, is that people usually do bigger pulls here, but they ignore the Honor Guards, because not only are they very scary on tank damage and group damage, but they also have a lot more HP than all the other mobs. So they're probably just gonna beat a seat here, and once they deal with the rest of the mobs, they're probably going to Shadow Melt to get rid of the aggro from these Honor Guards. Yeah,
you actually do also see one of the Shield Bearers ending up getting Entangling Rooted off to the side as well. Obviously, there are 2 Shield Bearers in the pack that they are currently doing, and then a Witch Doctor, and then there's just a couple more mobs. They need to make sure that they end up CCing that Bulwark of Juju cast that we do see them ending up having to deal with. They end up using Leg Sweep, and they ended up also pulling those 2 invisible Stalkers that pat up and down those staircases. They ended up looking like they pulled it with like a Chi Burst or something like that, but they ended up doing a pretty sizable pull, and it's pretty good for on the side of Abrakeydabra, as they do end up Shadow Melting all those mobs that they did have CC'd off, and then they end up running towards Volcall here.
Yeah, so the one thing you just saw was quaking happening during your during the shroud from the rogue. That's one thing you're definitely gonna want to watch out for if you have quaking as an affix. If you're shrouding and you're all on top of each other and then you get quaking in the middle of your shroud, if you damage each other with the quaking, you're actually gonna get out of stealth and you can pull mobs. So you definitely want to watch out. Either you wait for the quaking to happen and then you shroud, or you're for sure that you can spread out in the shroud when it's happening. So we see Abrakeydabra not having an issue here as they're pulling Volcal.
Yep, and you do see Puolukka mirroring the same shroud that you did see on the side of Abrakeydabra, making sure to hug that left side and then making sure to hug that right side in order to not be able to pull any of those mobs that do have true side. They do end up having to DPS down all three of these reanimation totems in sync, making sure that they end up killing them the same, because if they do end up getting their cast off, they will heal to full, which will cost a team a significant amount of time, cost Elsrat a lot of healing, and just put the teams at behind. But you do see Abrakeydabra killing all three of those totems evenly, and Volcal is activated. On the side of Team Puolukka, they are dealing with the reanimation totems as well, and they are going to be killing them shortly here.
Yeah, so in the second phase, as you can see in Abrakeydabra here, Volcal is active and does AoE damage to the whole group, and you can see those pools that are spawning underneath players. So this is why you kind of want to walk together. You want to make sure you drop the pools, and then the tank will move the boss, so you just don't have to stand in them. Now there's a decent amount of AoE damage coming in at this fight, but it's definitely healable, especially in a fortified setting. And other than that, Volcal just kind of slowly kills himself. That's why we usually see teams not really using a lot of offensive cooldowns here, because it's not going to be as worth on a boss that kills himself compared to something else like Trash later on a 45.
Yeah, we actually do. We do predict them to actually pull a pretty sizable amount of Trash after this pack as well. So making sure that you do end up holding on to your cooldowns and doing everything you can in order to be able to not end up having to use a bunch of offensive cooldowns in Volcal is very important, because you end up doing like a double Stalker pull with double Witch Doctor and the Shield Bearers on the side of Abrakeydabra here on the staircase most of the time. On the side of Puolukka, they have Volcal down to 35% here, and you do see Abrakeydabra ends up getting those two Stalkers out. Divine Field goes incredibly low, gets threat on them for a second, and ends up pulling them here.
Yeah, so this is a scary pull because of those double Witch Doctors and the scary amount of damage that Divine Field is going to get. Now the Witch Doctors, they constantly cast Venom Blast on random targets, which is just a single target nuke that does a lot of damage, especially if you get targeted by two in a row or two of the same at the same time. And then on top of that, you also get a Hex cast, which you also want to interrupt. One of them actually went through on Abrakeydabra side, as you can see on Dr. J here as he got dispelled. So you definitely want a lot of interrupts here. That's why the Witch Doctors are getting focused down, because at some point you just run out of them, and then you want to deal with the rest of the mobs.
Yeah, but you do see Team Puolukka getting incredibly low. You also do have the Bulwark of Juju coming out on from the Shield Bearers, not allowing the mobs to take significantly reduced amounts of damage. So making sure that you do end up getting those stunned or paralysis or gouged or something like that is very important for your or the sorts. You actually do see the Reaping coming out on Team Abrakeydabra as they do end up pulling it into a Skyscreamer pack. And the reason that the Hexers are also super, or the Witch Doctors are super scary, is actually because they end up having to be so high priority that you end up having to kill them early, and they end up bolstering the rest of the pack, making your tank, or if your tank ended up having to kite, making your melee DPS actually pretty scared in order from dying. Abrakeydabra there having a pretty big Skyscreamer bolster pretty high, but it ends up going down as it was pretty low. We got bolster from the Saurids, and they are going to end up dealing with the Reaping here as they do pull it into the Saurid pack. Divine Field getting incredibly low though, and on side of Team Puolukka, they end up dealing with their pack, getting their Reaping proc, and they're looking to mirror the pull. Actually, they end up paralysing the Skyscreamer, pulling the Saurids in order to not bolster up that Skyscreamer.
Yeah, these kind of pulls here are very annoying to deal with bolstering, as you see Divine Field just struggling so much to keep up with this pack here, as this Skyscreamer is bolstered so much from all the swords that died around him. Now this is why these packs are annoying to deal with on the bolstering settings, because the Skystreamers have so much more HP than the swords, but the swords are the scarier mobs, right? They are the ones that jump around and do a lot of AoE damage to your whole group. So in theory you want to deal with the swords first before you deal with the Skyscreamer, but on a bolstering setting you don't necessarily want to do that, because then the Skyscreamer just gains so much damage and HP. As we see Divine Field doing another snap here where they pull a bunch of swords on top, and you can see this CC coming out of the Skyscreamers here. There's a sap on one of the Skyscreamers in the back, and probably another CC on the other Skyscreamer, just to not have to deal with this bolstering affix here.
Yep, and you actually do see Puolukka doing a little bit differently. They end up CCing both of the Skyscreamers and then pulling them together by themselves. You actually did see Gatya end up going down, releasing, popping his Lightfoot Potion and stealthing all the way back, but then Click does end up getting killed by the Quaking. He procs his Wansambi's Bargain, and so that renders that trinket. It's like a cheat death-esque style trinket, so that renders that useless. While inside of Abrakeydabra, they proc their third Reaping of the Instance and pull it into this pack.
So Abrakeydabra actually pulling triple Skyscreamer with this pack here of double casters and double melee. So that is pretty scary because there's a lot of interrupts you need. You need to interrupt the triple Skyscreamers and you need to interrupt the Augurs as well, who constantly cast fireballs. So, but it seems to be working out for them, except Divine Field just dropping very low. They need to make sure they're handling the bolstering here properly. Now, one thing I want to mention with bolstering is the way that rogues used to be for bolstering when Sap Rogue was still like very good before it got nerfed. That was why Sap Rogues were so good on a bolstering setting in the past, because they just gained so much single target damage from having a lot of mobs around, and therefore they could deal with the bolstering very well, just get that single target damage and then AoE the rest of the mobs down. But unfortunately, rogues, or luckily I would say, Sap Rogues got nerfed, so not happening anymore.
Yep, and you do see on the side of Abrakeydabra, Elsarat positioning himself in order to be able to bait that Juggernaut cast. That Merciless Assault ends up targeting Elsarat. It ends up getting canceled because it has no path available to be able to jump. So the Juggernauts are able to get DPS down evenly, which is very important in a bolstering setting. On the side of Puolukka, they're doing a similar pull to what we did see on the side of Team Abrakeydabra, pulling a bunch of the Skyscreamers into that caster pack, just making sure that they do get kicks out on Skyscreamers in order to not be able to fear them. Obviously, they're not running Elemental Shaman, so they don't have a Tremor Totem. But you do see Abrakeydabra DPSing down that pack really well, getting it killed evenly, getting their Reaping spawned, and they are looking like they're going to be pulling it into Priestess Alunza here.
Yeah, that was very well done, very well bolstering management by Abrakeydabra. Now, Elsarat is very low on mana though, so I'm not sure if he managed to get a Shadow Melt off before this, but I don't think so, as the boss is pulled and Shadow Melt does not get you out of boss combat anymore, so no way of him to refresh his mana here except the Innervate that he popped just now. But at this point, Priestess, as long as you deal with the Reaping, is not going to be very scary, especially not on a fortified setting. So as long as they kill the Reaping, they should be fine, even if Elsarat is low on mana.
Yeah, it shouldn't be too bad. You do have the Transfusion that does a little bit of damage over the whole entire group, but it's nothing that can't be out-healed with just like a single Wild Growth or just like a couple hots. On the side of Team Puolukka, they do end up popping their Bloodlust on the big trash pack in front of Priestess Alunza. They're doing it a little bit bigger than on the side of Abrakeydabra, and then utilizing their Bloodlust. So similar to what we saw in the beginning, where they were just doing a little bit different of a pull, using deciding that they would rather use their Bloodlust on trash as opposed to a boss with a little bit more efficient of cleave. And on the side of Abrakeydabra, they do still have their Bloodlust available, as you're all dipping inside of these pools of blood in order for the Transfusion to be able to kill Priestess Alunza by herself.
Yeah, we've actually seen some teams opting to not use the Bloodlust for this big pull and just rather save it for the very last boss fight for Yasma, because that boss fight just takes a very long time, even on a fortified setting. So a lot of teams just trying to pull this off, this huge trash pull, without having to use the Bloodlust. And Abrakeydabra definitely showing that they can do it without the Bloodlust. Now they're only 3% left on trash, and the last boss Yasma. So what we're probably going to see is a Skyscreamer pull, so seeing it somewhere and then killing it at the very last second, or something else to get the last percentage, just to make sure they can skip the last Reaping wave.
Yep, and Elsarat runs away from Priestess Alunza just a little bit early in order to be able to start this RP event on these stairs. Just a second, you actually do see Swagfist ending up running off to the side there just kind of a second. If you didn't see it on the side of your screen, he ends up rolling away. He looks like he's going to end up pulling a Skyscreamer or something like that, and they're going to end up being able to CC it inside of Yasma's room. So they ended up holding Bloodlust, and the reason for that being is probably because of the Soul Rend mechanic on Yasma. So basically, four members, excluding the tank, ending up get targeting by the Soul Rending, and you end up spawning like a mirror image of yourself, and it ends up walking at Yasma. If it touches Yasma, you end up getting a pretty sizable dot on yourself, which will probably end up wiping you, honestly. So making sure that they end up getting the Bloodlust so they can get as few Soul Rends out as possible is very important. So the reason for that being is because they are running a triple melee comp. Having significant amount of downtime on the boss ends up reducing your kill time by a lot. On the side of Puolukka, they do end up having Priestess at 9%, while Abrakeydabra sitting at 66% on Yasma with Bloodlust still rolling here. Elsarat doing 18k DPS. I know we were a little bit critical of how much DPS he's been doing on previous weeks, but he's actually stepping it up right here and doing a pretty good amount of damage on Yasma.
Yeah, Elsarat definitely doing a lot of AoE damage here, or single target damage rather, on the boss, as you can see him popping off on the damage meter, and also of course dealing with the damage incoming, which is not that much on Yasma, except when the Soul Rend is coming up and tank damage. But other than that, not much AoE damage coming in. Now, one thing to note as well is that the min-maxing on these kind of boss fights that are just very important. Just like you mentioned, if you lose uptime on the boss, then it's just going to cost you so much time. This is why we see the Soul Rend actually not being moved very far away at all from the boss. they're just basically putting it a couple of yards behind the boss, and then it's very crucial that you actually see the mobs before they reach the boss, and you just nuke them down while you still damage the boss while having passive AoE and stuff like that. As we can see, usually we see the AoE stun coming out from Swagfist and just random AoE from all the melees coming out to deal with them, and probably Atal'Dazar is finishing them off with this swipe, with the cat form coming in, just so the damage dealers don't lose a lot of uptime on the boss. And just Abrakeydabra, oh, they actually had one ad going through. As I was talking about min-maxing, they didn't have SSC coming in, they have the dot on the whole group, but Yasmer is low, so they should be able to out-heal this, but it does so much damage on the group. We need, Atal'Dazar needs to use all of his healing cooldowns coming in, and they need to use all of their defensives to survive here as the boss goes down.
Yep, but Abrakeydabra
start stepping that up as they go on into game 2. Abrakeydabra wanting to seal out the series quick on Shrine of the Storm.
Right, so we see Abrakeydabra and Team Puolukka doing a very similar pull here at the start, as we see the tanks just using their speed potion to gather as many mobs as possible. As you see Divine Field using one of those snapping spots on those lanterns as he jumps up, and probably got the tricks of the trade from the rogues too to gather all of these mobs. Now these are scary pulls because these casters, they hurt a lot. They continuously cast Water Blast on a tank, which is an insane amount of damage. As we all know, Prod Warrior is not very well for this kind of magic damage. They're super good for physical damage, but as soon as it's magic damage, they struggle a little bit. That's why you need a lot of control when you do those kind of pulls.
Yeah, you do actually see Bloodlust come out on the side of Team Puolukka. The reason that they ended up using that snap spot, and the reason that snap spot is so good, is because of this explosive affix. We saw this a little bit earlier from one of the teams, and they end up using the snap spots in order to be able to DPS down the explosive orbs relatively quickly. Because the mobs are getting grouped up so tightly, the explosive orbs are really tight-knit and very close to one another, so it's very easy for both teams to end up being able to DPS down this. You do see Abrakeydabra and Team Puolukka looking like they're mirroring pulls, as they are both sitting at 12% count right here, while Abrakeydabra does actually have the Bloodlust available for them, and they are just neck and neck. So this is actually not super great for Puolukka. They end up burning Bloodlust, and they're still like neck and neck with Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, so definitely what you said, Team Puolukka is slightly ahead, but they use their Bloodlust, while Abrakeydabra actually has their Bloodlust available to do a huge pull on the boss plus some trash. As we see, Click actually dropping very, very low, has to leap away. Probably some of those water blasts just going through, doing so much tank damage, as we mentioned earlier. As Click is just trying to go lineups, or go so far away from the mobs, so they're actually trying to chase him instead of casting. He has to be careful though. If he loses aggro, they will cast Water Blast on melees and on damage dealers, and they will definitely get one-shot by those Water Blasts in a fortified setting, so you gotta watch out for that.
Yeah, something to note too is Gatya ends up doubling Atal'Dazar's DPS on this pull, just making sure that he's trying to min-max and get as much damage as possible, while Abrakeydabra popping the Lightfoot Potion, running all the way to Acusier's room, a wonderfully designed boss, and the whole entire group is going to be shadow melding. And the whole entire group is going to be shadow melding, while Team Puolukka just seconds behind because of how Click ended up having to kite. The mobs ended up getting separated just a little bit, and Click had to end up jumping out of the pack a little bit before Divine Field did, so it was just a little bit less damage overall in the group, even though Gatya was doing a significant amount more damage than Atal'Dazar. They both start the RP on Acusier and pulling in Acusier on the side of Abrakeydabra, while Team Puolukka just kind of taking it a little bit slower.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra pulling the mobs into the boss here while using their Bloodlust too, and it's very, like, you can see very well between those two teams how every small change really matters. As both of the teams did the exact same pulls up until this boss, then Puolukka was slightly ahead because they had the Bloodlust, but then Abrakeydabra caught up again just because of this tank struggle. And as soon as a tank has to leap out, he does no damage anymore, so you lose overall time. And as soon as the tank is about to die, everyone else has to go in defensive mode too, right? You don't want to have anyone dying, so the healer needs to stop doing damage, heal the tank up. Everyone else needs to make sure everything's interrupted. The mobs are just spreading out, so all the damage slows down a little bit as everyone goes into defensive mode, and this just costs you valuable time. This is why you can see everything, like all those small things, mattering so much in these matchups. As Abrakeydabra is on 56% on the boss, while Team Puolukka is just approximately 20% behind.
Yeah, this is what we expect out of a team of MDI veterans, making sure that they are able to really know their limits, making sure that the mobs stay grouped up for prolonged periods of time. As Abrakeydabra does push Acusier to 50% here, spawning Aqualings across the room. Obviously, all these Aqualings need to be tanked by a melee or a healer or somebody on their side of Abrakeydabra in order to be able to make sure that they don't end up casting abilities on the whole entire group and making them take increased damage. Abrakeydabra does still have 2 apprentices up, as we do see them being tanked by Divine Field here, making sure that Divine Field is popping adequate amounts of cooldowns, dodging out of the way of the surging rushes and not getting knocked off the bridge is very important. Where on the side of Team Puolukka, they get the boss to 50% and still have the 2 apprentices available to them, and they spawn the Aqualings as well. Making sure that they are DPSing down the Aqualings is very important. And Underrot actually goes down.
Okay, this is very scary for Abrakeydabra because they, of course, don't have a battle rest available to them because none of the classes that are in this team can battle rest and they can't have engineering. So Underrot is going to stay down for the rest of this fight. Now, unfortunately, they only have 1 Aqualing left, and oh no, they actually got hit by the surging rush, but they managed to survive. Now, so this shouldn't be a problem for them to finish it off, but it's going to be a struggle, and they're going to lose time because everyone has to go in defensive mode again, as I mentioned, right? Everyone needs to play defensive, everyone needs to make sure they're surviving, maybe get some off heals from the Windwalker, just to make sure that you survive, meaning they lose time. As you can see, Team Puolukka, on the other hand, they're also going to be in the last phase soon, and they're going to catch up on the time that they lost earlier. Yeah,
in addition to that, you might not be able to pull that initiates, those 4 initiates in AccuSeer just because Divine Field not being able to get the healing that is required to be able to deal with AccuSeer plus those couple of initiates. In addition to that, Swagfist, while he can single target res Elsarat, it costs them the 5 seconds from the death plus the 8-second res. So that's just going to cost them time, while Team Puolukka ends up having a clean AccuSeer pull. And it ends up going through here. They pop their Shroud, they're running all the way through, and they're running to the Iron Hole Apprentice pulls here.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra and Team Puolukka now neck on neck as Abrakeydabra fell a little bit behind. So Team Puolukka actually able to catch up here. Well, they do the same pull basically. They're pulling the whole hallway, they're pulling the mobs that are outside, and this pull will proc the 40% Reaping Wave. There's a lot of dangerous caster here and a lot of other mobs that are pretty dangerous. You want to make sure that you do have a control pull. You want to make sure that everything is getting interrupted properly. Also the Iron Halls here that casts AoE stun basically, that you can only interrupt with stuns or knockbacks, but you still want to make sure you are interrupting them, because if you don't, then all your melee DPS need to go out and need to dodge it, losing valuable uptime. That's why you see the stuns and the knockbacks coming in as soon as the Iron Halls cast the slam.
Yeah, so basically that Whirling Tempest is that big AoE like Nagura was describing. In addition to that, the apprentices have a Tempest cast, which ends up spawning a tornado that ends up being thrown out, and making sure that you do actually get that kick, because it is like a pretty significant area denial and costing both teams a pretty significant amount of damage, and a triple melee group is important. Both teams ending up doing their invisibility skip really well, proccing their Reaping, only getting 1 of the Reaping mobs as it does tether even through Shadow Meld. The 1 mob that ends up proccing the Reaping ends up just tethering back to you. And both sides, on both teams, we're actually seeing mirrored pulls here. As Senki actually does go incredibly low, he procs his cheat death, but he ends up getting healed back up as everybody goes so low on the side of Team Puolukka.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra and Team Puolukka just doing the same pull here, but like having a lot of struggles to be able to survive here. As you see his Syndicate actually going down here, as he doesn't have his cheat death available anymore. They do have a battle rest, they get him back up, so they need to recover at this point. I think the problem for Team Puolukka is they were just missing a bunch of Tempest here. As you can see all those tornadoes going out, and these tornadoes are so scary. They do so much damage in a fortified setting. It's the same tornadoes as on the boss later, as Guildcaller Faye cast, that we will see later on. And if you get hit by them, I think one or two ticks definitely kill you straight up. So you want to have to be very, very careful. As we see one of the rogues is going down. Abrakeydabra having a much cleaner trash pull on their side, as they're already pulling the boss here.
Yeah, and when that rogue did end up going down, Click ended up having to kite for his life there. He dropped incredibly low, forcing the mobs. He had to end up line of sighting a bunch of the mobs. The Iron Hole Apprentices obviously stay on him the whole entire time, while the Iron Hole initiates end up staying on him the whole entire time, while the apprentices end up casting, but he ends up having to run across in line of sighting, just costing them more time, while Abrakeydabra ends up popping their Shroud, running into Brother Iron Hole and Guildcaller Faye, potentially pulling some initiates into them whenever they deem it is necessary. The reason for that being, and the reason that they're going to try to pull it a little bit slower, is just because of this explosive affix. It forces your priority on your damage to be a little bit spread out whenever you do have to kind of panic and try to make sure that you're actually killing these explosive orbs. So making sure that they are waiting on the apprentices and those initiates is actually super smart on the side of Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, I think Abrakeydabra did a much better pull here. As you can see, Team Puolukka actually pulled the patrol, the apprentices that they double CC'd earlier while killing the initiates. They pulled them on top of the boss at the very start. Well, Abrakeydabra still has them CC'd, as you can see on their side. They just pulled all the initiates on top of the boss. They did Zap and CC the other mobs to the blind and CC coming out from the Windwalker here. And they're probably going to wait until Gale Color is down, and then when only Brother Ironhall is alive, which doesn't really, it's not very scary at all once Brother Ironhall is the only one alive, and then they're going to pull them up on top of it, which with probably the Enforcer as well that Elsred is going to pull later. So I just like this pull from Abrakeydabra so much better. It's much safer and just seems more efficient as well.
Yeah, it looks like on the side of Team Puolukka, they have a 4-stack of that Slicing Blast. So basically, whenever Gale Color does cast, you cast a Slicing Blast, and it puts a debuff on the whole entire group. So they've had a decent amount of those casts going through. On the side of Abrakeydabra, that's why you see those apprentices CC'd. They were throwing all of their kicks into Gale Color Phase, Slicing Blast, just making sure that it did get interrupted every single time. You actually do see Elsrat jumping out, killing that explosive orb in cat form, and then now they're pulling some of the initiates into Brother Ironhole just by himself. So making sure they're able to deal with the explosives and making sure that they have an ample amount of kicks for those apprentices was actually the reason that they ended up having a little bit more inefficient amounts of cleave between the two mobs, because efficiency of cleave is actually relatively important, but making sure that you do actually have an ample amount of interrupts is also super important, as it is I think it's a 3 melee rotation on Gale Color Phase Slicing Blast, so they wouldn't have had enough kicks in order to be able to deal with all those apprentice casts.
Yeah, we see Abrakeydabra finishing off Ironhall here, as they also finish off the initiates and all the other mobs to succeed on the way. Now Elsa did not pull the Enforcer, so they either don't need the percentage or they're just gonna do it later as on a saver pull. Now they are 57%. They need to get 3% more on this side of the area before they proc the Reaping and go on the other side and use their Shadow Mount. So they're either gonna pull those Enforcers here, okay, as they are. So they're pulling all the Enforcers together. One of them actually being CC'd because they probably just don't need those.
Yeah, so yeah, they have 2 of the Enforcers blinded. Elsarat off screen actually ended up pulling a mob. I actually didn't see what it was. So they're doing, it looks like 4 Enforcers together, which is actually very scary on the side of Divine Field. He actually needs to be in melee range in order to be able to take the deep smashes, because if he's not in melee range, then it will go on the nearest target. So making sure that he does get those is very important. Additionally, you do have the Ritualist in the pack, which the Ritualist actually needs multiple kicks, and the reason for that being is it does put a shadow debuff on the whole entire group, making them take increased shadow damage, not only from the cast, but from additionally the Void Seed. On the side of Team Puolukka, though, they do have 59% count, so they're only going to need 1 mob here before they end up proccing their Reaping and running it all the way through to the bridge, making sure that they Shadow Melt off that Reaping. But Abrakeydabra is pulling a lot more Enforcers, so they're pulling more percent in order to be able to skip more later in the instance, which is definitely interesting. But on Puolukka's side, we've actually seen them having a pretty clean run for something that we criticized for being 5 minutes slower than Abrakeydabra in time trials.
Now, this Abrakeydabra pull here is actually so dangerous in so many levels, because not only are the Enforcers dangerous, but also the Ritualist. And you see Divine Field, of course, can't tank those mobs. As soon as he tanks the mobs, he will just die. That's why he needs to kite. Now, the problem with kiting is that you also have a Ritualist. The Ritualist is a caster, and he will not move with you all the time, unless he gets interrupted. So you want to have as much efficient damage as possible while getting the Ritualist interrupted, but also get AoE damage on the Enforcers, because they all need to die at the same time. Because they were on 59%, as soon as one of the mobs dies, they actually get the Reaping Wave. So what they wanted to do is they want to kill them all at the very same time, which is dangerous or is difficult because, as I said, the tank needs to kite, one of them is a caster, all the other ones are not. So you need to kite them in a small circle, so all of the mobs are close to each other, so the AoE actually gets... So everyone gets hit by the AoE. So very well done by Abrakeydabra to pull this off and to kill them all at the same time to get the Reaping Wave while all the mobs are dead, and to get the Shadow Melt skip in here.
Yeah, but they're mirroring Puolukka's pull here with the Cultist Tentacle Pack, so that makes me kind of wondering what they're going to end up skipping. Obviously, there's a pretty big disparity in terms of trash percentage, but you don't actually need this much trash count towards this back half of the instance, so we're going to end up seeing what they end up skipping here. They are shrouding through here. They end up pulling one of the Cultist packs, which makes me suspect that they're going to end up pulling it into maybe one of the Abyss Dweller packs, or maybe they're just going to pull one of the Cultist packs solo, which is actually kind of interesting, because on the side of Team Puolukka, they're pulling both of these Cultist Deathbringer packs together, which is just more efficient. Obviously, Team Abrakeydabra does have Bloodlust available to them, while Team Puolukka does not right now. While I don't expect Abrakeydabra to end up popping Bloodlust here, it's just something that is definitely interesting, especially since they ended up doing like a 4 Enforcer pull, which seems like it would be more efficient just do this double Cultist, double Deathbringer pack on the side of Abrakeydabra.
Well, Abrakeydabra also had a shine just kind of stealthing off. I do believe he triggered the boss event, but then in the end, like, why was it not Elstrat who went off instead of Ashine? I feel like that was a little bit inefficient to have your damage dealer go off and trigger the event instead of your healer. But anyway, Abrakeydabra finished just one pack here. They only gonna need those 2 Dweller packs to proc their 80% reaping wave. So the only trash they need anymore is these 2 Dwellers and then the rest of the trash in the last boss room. Now Team Puolukka, 76%, so they need a little bit more as compared to Abrakeydabra. While they finish off this Dweller pack, Abrakeydabra procced their reaping wave, Shadow melted, and now they're on their way to the boss.
Yeah, this is super interesting. We've actually seen an adaptation in terms of like what you end up pulling from Abrakeydabra, but I don't think it's actually better on the back half of the instance. Obviously, that 4 Enforcer pull end up kind of like throwing a wrench in their count. Team Puolukka, though, getting their 80% reaping here just from the second Dweller pack, which normally ends up being a more typical route where you do both of the Cultist pulls and then the Tentacle pull and then
Elstrat died.
Oh, that's so bad. So Elstrat is the only battle res available for his team, but he ends up going down, so they're going to end up having to reset Lord Stormsong, which is going to end up setting them behind Team Puolukka here, or worst case scenario, evening it up whenever they were so far ahead.
Team Puolukka definitely in the driver's seat now, as the Abrakeydabra had a huge mistake. Elstrat going down is going to cost them so much time. They have to reset the boss, they have to rest him back up, the boss, of course, resetting his HP, they need to wait for the respawn timer. They're losing their offensive damage cooldowns because they probably used it on the pull. So Abrakeydabra losing so much time from Elstrat dying here. Huge mistake, as Team Puolukka already pulled the boss. They are on 72%. This is their time to catch up. Now Team Puolukka is in the driver's seat.
Man, that might be like literally like a 40 to 50 second mistake. So you end up losing about 20% of damage on the Lord Stormsong, as he did end up getting reset at about like 80-ish%. In addition to that, you had to wait for the respawn timer, you had to res Elstrat, and then you had to additionally, the 5-second death penalty just from Elstrat dying. While inside of Team Puolukka, they end up just dealing with the Abyss Dwellers and keep chugging along. They end up pulling Lord Stormsong, and now they're 25-ish% ahead of Abrakeydabra from whenever they hadn't already pulled the boss by the time Abrakeydabra did end up having that available. Abrakeydabra, however, does have Bloodlust available for them right now, while Team Puolukka does not, but it looks like it's going to end up coming up on Volzith about at the same time for both teams.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure if Team Puolukka will get their Bloodlust back up. 4 minutes is a long time. Now, the one difference I can still see here is that the Bloodlust, okay, so let me go back. I think Team Puolukka knows that they can one-face the boss without Bloodlust. Because I feel like else there's no way of them using the Bloodlust for anything else. Because if you don't have enough damage to one-face the last boss, then you're going to save the Bloodlust, because it just saves you so much time to have 1 intermission phase instead of 2. So I do believe that Team Puolukka has enough time, has enough damage to do it without. But if they end up just somehow not getting the right procs or not getting 5 buffs or whatever, and then they don't have enough damage and get a second intermission phase, then that's going to be the way back in for Abrakeydabra, because of course they do have the Bloodlust and they're going to be able to one-face the boss no matter what. So I think that's the only difference between those two teams, and that's what Abrakeydabra needs to hope for.
This is actually super bad for Abrakeydabra because they did end up wiping. They might have... So it depends on how long this room in Volzith's room ends up taking. So you have all the eel packs, you have the Sunken and Forgotten Denizen packs, and then you have Volzith himself. So it really depends on how long he ends up taking in order to, like, how long you should be holding your Bloodlust for. We're seeing Abrakeydabra electing to only use 2 Bloodlusts on the whole entire instance because they did expect like a 19-ish minute Shrine of the Storm. So it's going to end up being like net loss of 1 Bloodlust on the whole entire instance. So while they do have it, maybe either Puolukka expects to be doing this room slower. Maybe in their time trials, obviously they were going like incredibly slow by comparison to what they're doing now. Or maybe they ended up expecting to pull like all the eels, the Sunken and Forgotten Denizens, and then just waiting for Bloodlust. Or maybe, like you said, they just expect to have enough damage to do it without, which I seem is highly unlikely, especially with how much health this fight has, even on a fortified setting.
Yeah, it is definitely going to be very difficult to one-face this boss without Bloodlust. So we're going to see what Team Puolukka is choosing to do, because like their time trial at times was 24 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about this earlier on the desk, and we do believe that they just had a wipe coming in. Like, we don't think that they were playing their strategy perfectly and still had a 24 minutes run, because that's just way too slow compared to Abrakeydabra, on the other hand, who had a 19-minute, 27-second run. Now, of course, Abrakeydabra is not going to have this kind of time anymore, because they had a huge mistake coming in on the boss before. So definitely their strategy seems to be better, but if they have this huge mistake, then they can still lose, of course. So Abrakeydabra on 88% trash compared to Team Puolukka on 81%, engaging the boss just now.
Yeah, but Abrakeydabra did end up killing a couple of those packs of eels prior to pulling Volzith. Either they ended up not getting like a safety shroud, or they ended up wanting to do it on purpose. I don't actually know the strategy, so it's very difficult to say whether or not it was on purpose or unintended. But on the side of Puolukka, they do actually end up having Volzith down to 73%, getting that promises a power buff on both of the healers, Gatya and Elsarat, and then utilizing it to maximum effectiveness is the way that we actually see a lot of teams ending up doing this room very quickly. So basically that promises a power debuff ends up getting a significant damage buff to your healer, as we do see on the side of Team Puolukka, Gatya doing 23k DPS, doing more than both of his rogues and his prot warrior here. Probably going to pass Frush here in a second. And we actually do see Puolukka end up pulling the pack of trash right before Volzith, the double Forgotten Denizens, Consuming Essence mobs, and the Sunken Denizens. So making sure that you do kick that Consume Essence is very important, as it will heal the Denizens to full, and it will end up actually killing your healer, as it does do just a little bit amount of AoE, but Gatya does have reduced health at the cost of a significant amount of damage. Abrakeydabra doing the exact same pull that we did see from Puolukka there, the Forgotten Denizen, Sunken Denizen pull.
Yeah, one thing to note here with the explosive affix, explosive definitely got a little bit easier as it was nerfed over time, so now explosive is not a huge deal anymore, but it can create problems, especially if you have full melee lineups. And in these intermission phases where the 3 DPS get split from the tank and the healer, the denizens actually spawn explosives. Not all the mobs that spawn in a boss fight do spawn explosive, but those denizens do. So if you have all melee in one of them and the other one spawns explosive without having a healer available to you, it can definitely cause a wipe if you have a cast going off plus explosive. But Team Puolukka already engaging the boss fight, and they have their bloodlust ready at this point, so they have to pop their bloodlust if they want to one-phase it, but it was very close. They just got it back up. Now they are 96%, so if they finish the boss fight and they get the last percentage, they can win, but it's neck on neck, right? Abrakeydabra also on the boss, they also only need 8% left, but they have one more death compared to Team Puolukka.
Yeah, this is important to note. Abrakeydabra does need, in fact, 2 packs of eels, while Puolukka only needs 1. So the reason for this is, like, so basically you're going to have to pull the eels across the room in order to be able to group them up very quickly on the side of Abrakeydabra, whereas Puolukka is only going to have to deal with 1 pack of eels. The travel time for the eels in order to be able to group them up and in order to be able to DPS them down efficiently is actually very scary, as we do expect Volzith to actually be 2-phased by both teams here, and it's going to be neck and neck. We actually do also see a 5-second differential coming in from Abrakeydabra, though, just because of Elsarat's death on Lord Stormsong.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra killing the boss later, and they also need more trash percentage, so it's going to be Team Puolukka who probably ends up winning here. So Abrakeydabra actually drops really low here, as they probably have some explosives coming through, and Team Puolukka just gonna win this first match. Clean run by Team Puolukka. For the first 10 minutes, we're probably just going to see trash, 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 no bosses whatsoever. We're going to see the double shot coming out from both of those teams, as we're most likely going to see a bloodlust trash pull at the very start here.
Yeah, and something also to notice about how the Quaking ends up lining up on coin-operated crowd pummeler. It can end up like being super scary, as we do actually see Divine Field on the side of Abrakeydabra doing a pretty sizable pull, running inside that pavilion, getting stunned by those thugs. While we do see Click and Team Puolukka being a little bit trigger-happy on their Bloodlust, but they end up doing a little bit different of a pull from Abrakeydabra. I would have liked to see Puolukka get all their mobs grouped up a little bit better prior to popping that Bloodlust, but we do actually see it coming out pretty quick, as we do see the Sanguine start to drop for Abrakeydabra and Team Puolukka.
We actually see a Sanguine pull right underneath those Peacekeepers on Team Puolukka's side, healing all the way to 100%. This is going to cost them so much time. Team Puolukka, you can see, they used their Bloodlust, but they're pretty much wasted all their damage on the Peacekeepers, as they are still on 100% HP because they healed so much. So their Bloodlust basically wasted at this time, while Abrakeydabra is about to kill their Peacekeepers already. Sanguine is one of those affixes that is not going to kill you, but it's going to definitely waste you a lot of time if you don't play it properly.
Yeah, so basically the Peacekeepers end up having a pretty significant amount of cast. We actually do see them channeling that shield, which is the reason that Sanguine is just so obnoxious in this instance. That plus the Charge Claw cast, so the Peacekeepers will end up stopping and just standing in Sanguine, healing all the time. We saw it now tweeting about it. He's like, Motherlode is the worst dungeon. He goes, whenever you're on Sanguine, he goes, no, yes, no, please ring your peace, please ring your peace, no, and then you end up healing the mobs with Sanguine. So it ends up being pretty much a bloodbath like Sours was describing. Abrakeydabra here ending up rooting one of the assassins there and doing a pretty big pull here. They do have 14% trash count versus Team Puolukka's 8% here, while we do see Puolukka ending up dealing with 3 Peacekeepers all at once.
Yeah, the problem with the Peacekeepers as well is that they're not seeable, right? You can't speed them up in any way, you can't knock them, you can't do anything to them, basically. Now, you can knock all the other trash that are not Peacekeepers. So what you want to do with Sanguine, you want to make sure that all the other mobs that are dying around them are getting knocked away from the Peacekeepers as soon as they're about to die. That's why you can see the Ring of Peace coming out of Abrakeydabra right now as they try to get the jockey away from the Peacekeepers, but they didn't really manage. Okay, so now they got a taunt. You saw Alstrad actually taunting the jockey out just to make sure that the Sanguine doesn't drop below the Peacekeepers. And this is the kind of control that you need in this dungeon with Sanguine. You want to make sure the Typhoons come in at the right time, the Ring of Peace, and if necessary, you just want to have to taunt the mobs away from them, because if the Peacekeepers heal, you lose so much time.
Yeah, and making sure that you actually do get those mech jockeys inside of those Peacekeepers is also very important. Basically, you do end up getting a pretty sizable amount of your count just from those mech jockey Peacekeeper mobs, as we do see the first reaping of the instance coming in on Abrakeydabra as Team Puolukka ends up dealing with their first reaping of the instance, getting it killed, as we did see Click end up getting hit by that circle ground effect there, getting knocked across the map. He ends up being okay. He's just going to do 10% less damage and take 10% less healing, so not too big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, especially for a tank, but Team Puolukka doing a pretty big pull here. They need to make sure that they do not sanguine these mechanized Peacekeepers for prolonged periods of time, as you actually see Jay go pretty low on the side of Abrakeydabra, as Elsarat also gets hit by that ground effect that we actually did see Click getting hit by a second ago.
So Team Puolukka on the right side of the screen actually did something very smart with their Ring of Peace. As you see those jockeys that are randomly standing there in the rooms. Now the jockeys, if they get in combat with your team, the first thing they will do is they will run to a deactivated Peacekeeper and they will cast Activate Mech. Now, if this cast is getting interrupted somehow, the Peacekeeper will not be activated and it will not be attackable. So you definitely want to make sure you don't interrupt that. Now, one more thing to note, though, is that the mech jockeys will they will run to the closest Peacekeeper to them. If there's two jockeys, they will both run to the same Peacekeeper, but then only one of them will activate it. So this is why we saw Team Puolukka using a Ring of Peace before they pulled to make sure that the jockeys were separated. So one of them ran to the left Peacekeeper and one of them ran to the right Peacekeeper, just so they don't walk to the same one.
Yeah, a lot of the time we've actually been seeing a pretty significant amount of Death Knights in this dungeon just because of that. They're just able to grip those mech jockeys close to those unpiloted Peacekeeper robots very easy. You need to just make sure that they're not on like uneven ground whenever they go to pilot, otherwise they're just going to fail their pilot in some form or manner. You actually do see Team Puolukka using Gatya, ending up taunting one of the mobs, making sure it does get out of melee in order to not sanguine out that Peacekeeper as he does cast that Energized Shield. While on the side of Abrakeydabra, here comes their second reaping here as they are pulling it into some more Peacekeeper pulls and making sure that they are DPSing down everything very quickly.
Yeah, one thing to note here is that actually neither of those teams actually using their the DK. Which is one thing we usually see all the time in MOTHERLODE. We see the DKs come out because there's just so much trash, there's so much AoE that you can abuse the DK for. You can use those big AoE cooldowns to deal with the trash, but neither of those teams actually making use of the DK. We know that both of the teams can play the DK, they're just choosing to not use it, which is interesting. It's probably because of the Sanguine affix. They might just not want to have this huge burst coming in, because as soon as you burst the mobs, then they're going to die too fast, and then you might not be able to knock them out, or you're not going to be able to control them properly to see where the Sanguine drops. So this is probably just like a safer way to have more controlled damage to make sure that the Sanguine does not drop in places you don't want to have it dropped.
So something I'm really confused about is Abrakeydabра's use of Bloodlust, or lack thereof at this point. We obviously saw Puolukka end up pulling a pretty sizable amount on the first pull of the instance, while Abrakeydabra did a little bit different of a pull, but they ended up not using Bloodlust, and we are 5 minutes into the instance. Obviously Bloodlust is like a 10-minute cooldown, so they're either going to be using it on coin-operated crowd pummeler, or they're going to be ending up doing a pretty big pull here in just a little bit. But I'm kind of confused because they are putting it like 6 minutes in, even though it is a 10-minute cooldown, so normally making the most out of your Bloodlust and getting the most amount of uses is typically a little bit better than getting the most efficient uses of Bloodlust, just because of damage-wise and how the dungeons end up working, especially since you can't pull a ton of trash into the bosses in this instance. It's definitely something interesting. Maybe they might end up needing it for coin-operated crowd pummeler just because of how Quaking ends up interacting there. And you actually do see that mechanized Peacekeeper chilling the Sanguine. No!
Oh, no. He's going to heal all the way to full, and he's not going to be able to get out of the Sanguine for a while as he finally moves now. But yeah, this is the problem with Sanguine. And the one thing about Bloodlust, I think the only team so far that did not use Bloodlust on the very first pull in MOTHERLODE was Method EU, because they actually saved their Bloodlust for the boss when they pulled a bunch of other mobs on top of the boss with their DK. So it was like a DK strategy to not use the Bloodlust at the very start. But Abrakeydabra, they don't have a DK. So it is very interesting to see why they're saving their Bloodlust for so long, because at this time they're already 7 minutes into the dungeon. At this point, it's only 3 minutes left until they could have used that second Bloodlust. So definitely I wonder why they're doing this exactly. Now, the one reason might just be because if they use it now, maybe they still just don't get the same amount of Bloodlust. That could be the case. Maybe it doesn't matter if they use it at the start or 7 minutes into the fights. Maybe it's going to be the same thing for them, and they wouldn't get an extra round anyway. But we'll see. They have to use it soon to not waste the whole.
Yeah, but it's so weird because this is like, since it is a Sanguine week, pulling a bunch of trash into coin-operated crowd pummeler is typically not what you're looking to do. But they are actually still ahead on count, even though they do not actually have used that Bloodlust yet. As you do actually see Gatya go really low on the side of Team Puolukka, ends up recovering nicely. Click ending up getting it pretty high on stacks of Reaping, gets those dispelled off of him, while Abrakeydabra has already dealt with their third Reaping of the instance, has some more Peacekeepers that they're praying do not get stuck in Sanguine. So not using Bloodlust, and then like it costs you a bunch of time to have the mechanized Peacekeepers stuck in Sanguine.
So Gatya actually went down on Team Puolukka's side, and this might just be a full team wipe coming in, as they of course don't have a battle rest available for him. So he had to release. We see the tank go down, we see the rogue go down. This might just be a full wipe coming in for Team Puolukka. This is a disaster for them, as the mobs are already pretty low, and they had the Reaping as well. And now Gatya is in combat with the Reaping Souls, as of course they're not resetting. So now either the whole team has to release and use invisible potions to go through the trash I just skipped earlier, or Gatya just has to deal with this Risen Soul by himself, and then okay, so they have the Shroud coming in, and the rest of the team is going to catch up to help him, but this is a disaster for them. This is going to cost them so much time. Well, on the other side, Abrakeydabra, 9 minutes into the dungeon, still not used Bloodlust. Maybe, you know what? Maybe they just forgot to bring their drums.
Man, that would be something else, especially if none of them had drums on the tournament realm here. Yeah, but Puolukka having a full group wipe there is actually very, very bad for them on something that wasn't like super difficult. Gatya just getting incredibly low just due to Grave Bolts and maybe some of the Thug charges or something like that. Maybe the Mecha Jockey's cast as well, which is just like super scary, and that's actually so bad for them because that not only gives them, they're already behind on trash count, but they also have a 5-death, 25-second penalty attached to those 5 deaths as well, in addition to how much ever time they ended up having to remake, running back and shrouding and whatever else they ended up using. Well, Abrakeydabra does make their way to coin-operated crowd pummeler, proccing their 4th Reaping of the instance, and maybe we'll see their first Bloodlust of the instance come in 9 minutes and 43 seconds in.
Yeah, so actually 15 seconds off of wasting a whole Bloodlust.
I mean, they still haven't used it.
Yeah, they still haven't used it. We see Astor actually got hit by the frontal of the boss here, I think. So he just barely managed to heal himself up. Now we see the Reaping on top of the boss. This, in theory, should not be so scary. And yes, we see the Bloodlust and 10 minutes in. So they actually wasted a whole Bloodlust at this point. They wasted 10 minutes of Bloodlust. They could have used one at the very start. If they would use it at the very start, in their shrouds as the dungeon starts, they could have gotten a second one. So definitely a little bit of a waste here from Abrakeydabra, as they're using the Bloodlust, of course, on top of Crowd Pummeler, as it is a tyrannical setting, and these bosses just take so long on tyrannicals just because they have so much HP.
Yeah, and something that's actually super scary on Crowd Pummeler in general is just how the Quaking ends up lining up with the Static Pulse right here, like we see. So basically, the Static Pulse does a dot on everybody in the group, and since it is tyrannical plus Quaking, if you do end up getting that lined up and everybody's not topped or has defensives rolling or anything, it can actually be super scary. We've seen some other bosses, Overseer Korgus is one that's notable in my mind, that are just super scary whenever it's paired with tyrannical and Quaking, just because of how the damage patterns end up lining up. But we do see another Static Pulse coming in, and Elstrat ends up healing it back up, and then making sure that he ends up kicking the foot bombs in whenever they do come out here. So basically, every single foot bomb that you do end up kicking in gives the boss a 50% reduced damage taken debuff, and you actually do see Elstrat standing right next to that one, waiting for it to get close to expiring, and then he kicks it into the Crowd Pummeler, trying to be able to milk as much of that buff as he possibly can. While on the side of Puolukka, they end up killing some more Peacekeepers, just trying to get their 4th Reaping of the Instance proc, as one of the Peacekeepers does end up standing in Sanguine for a couple more seconds. That's so sad.
That's Sanguine, though. Now, Abrakeydabra, I want to take it back. Elsewhere actually did not get hit by the frontal. It was a static pulse. It just looked like it was something because only Divine Field and Elsewhere get hit by it, because Ashan and Dr. J most likely used their cloaks to get rid of this first pulse, because they had the Reaping on top of it as well. So definitely just a mechanic pulse, which is not avoidable for our Arrested Druid, not getting hit by the frontal here. Now, Abrakeydabra is on 13% at this point. They're going to be able to deal with the boss here, and then we're going to watch out for the very difficult trash that comes after this boss fight. We've seen a lot of teams actually fail on this trash.
Yeah, we actually do see Puolukka actually skipping to that trash that we were discussing. The rogue does go down instantly, but he looks like he got battle rezzed. It looks like they only pulled 3 packs, which and by and large we've seen like a 4 or 5 pack pull, as their other rogue does end up going down on the same team. Puolukka, this is so bad for them, but they don't end up having a full group wipe, which is going to be okay. But man, they just ended up using both of their battle reses there for something that they could have used like a Bloodlust or something like that on. You actually do see some of the Sanguine come out. They get a nice Typhoon, making sure all those mobs end up getting out of that Sanguine. So these Sapper mobs end up killing themselves with the final explosion at the very bottom end. So they could end up dying out of sync of the rest of the mobs in order. And like the Mine Rats also don't have a ton of health either. So making sure that you do get some knocks from Typhoon or Ring of Peace is actually very important here.
Yeah, the problem with these kind of pulls is that in theory you want to save your Ring of Peace and your Typhoon for the scary moments where the mobs just do so much damage to your team, right? But in this scenario, when you have Sanguine, you want to save your Ring of Peace and your Typhoon to get the mobs out of the Sanguine. So once we saw Divine Field dropping so low and almost dying, but they actually just held on to their Ring of Peace and held on their CC to make sure they get rid of the Sanguine instead of saving Divine Field here, really.
Yep, and here comes Team Puolukka popping their Bloodlust, and the whole entire group dips incredibly low as they get shock pulsed. And then you do see Abrakeydabra here, sitting here for a second, waiting for the Pat to come in order to be able to get all these mobs pulled in together. You actually did see one of those Earthshapers kind of stand in Sanguine for a little while, casting Rock Lance, a little bit late on the kick there, but you do see Abrakeydabra getting in wisely and making sure that they're actually able to pull all the mobs together, and then like you were saying, just making sure that they hold on to their CC, their Rings of Peace, their Typhoon, in order to be able to get all the mobs out of Sanguine at once.
Yeah, so we saw the Ring of Peace coming out here a little bit early at this time, but this is a huge pull. They pulled 3 packs together, and this is so much damage on the tank. As you can see, Divine Field is trying to cut the mobs, but they did have a lot of damage at the very end, so they're going to be able to finish up these mobs here. As we saw the Typhoon come out of Elsrad. One of those Sappers wasn't Sanguine, but he already casted his explosion, so he's just going to finish himself up no matter what. Now, Abrakeydabra, 99% trash. They're going to use their Shroud to get to the next boss, and from this point onward, it's just going to be bosses left. There's going to be 3 bosses left, and then at the end, they only need to finish off one of these bombs. That will take a second or 2, if even.
Yeah, that was actually super scary from the Shroud on the side of Abrakeydabra. So basically, if you actually do end up getting hit by friendly players quaking while inside that Shroud, it will end up breaking you out. As we do actually see Ashan and Dr. J getting fixated by these 2 Earth Ragers on Azarok here as it is engaged. Not exactly the most optimal thing. So with the triple melee comp, you're going to end up having significantly reduced uptime just by virtue of those Earth Ragers ending up fixating you. But it going on both 2 and 2 on each rogue is not exactly the greatest thing. You actually do see Dr. J getting meleeed by one of the Earth Ragers, taking a debuff here. You do see the Ring of Peace coming out as both of the rogues end up standing inside of it in order to be able to keep the Earth Ragers away from them as much as possible. As Swag Fist is going to town, PvEing, spinning, crane kicking, Fist of Furying, DPSing down the Earth Ragers as he is doing 80k DPS, while Team Puolukka finishing off coin-operated Crowd Pummeler here as they make their way through the rest of the instance here.
Yeah, one very nice thing to note there is that both Ashan and Dr. J had all the fixates from them up, so they were trying to stand as close to each other as possible, both of those rogues, to make sure that all the Earth Ragers are kind of stacking up and walking together. And this is why just those small things, right, stacking up all the Earth Ragers, making sure the AoE is increased as much as possible while still being able to hit the boss and AoE the ass at the same time. As they killed off all the Earth Ragers at this point, and now the boss is very easy. At this point, you're just gonna get 1 Earth Rager once in a while that you can just kite around. It doesn't really have, you don't really have to kill this one. It's not going to be a huge deal at all. So all you have to do is dodge the frontal, which I do believe these teams can do, and, and that there's nothing happening.
Yeah, low bar here. But we actually did see Farouche go down on the side of Team Puolukka in a series of unfortunate events, more for them, as they did end up pulling that Earthshaper pack. They end up, Click is looking to end up kiting it out as the pack is starting to get kind of messy here. You do see some of those sappers ending up killing themselves with the final blast, but it looks like it's going to be okay, as it was starting to get kind of scary on the side of Puolukka. They proc their last reaping at the instance. They're probably going to look to shadow meld some of it off, or end up having to deal with a couple of the mobs here. Okay, so they're Lightfoot potioning, they're running all the way to Azarok, and they're going to end up shadow melding off like all of that reaping plus the little bit left of trash. While on the side of Team Abrakeydabra here, we see them sitting at 99%. We've seen a lot more teams looking to pull trash into Azarok, but as it is a Sanguine week, unfortunately, pulling trash into bosses is normally not exactly what you're looking to do, because a lot of bosses have some aerial denial effects of some sort, and it's very difficult to be able to position them around Sanguine whenever Sanguine ends up just taking and preoccupying more and more of your space. Abrakeydabra here probably going to end up pulling one of the rats and then making their way into Rixa Fluxflame's room, while Team Puolukka has engaged Azarok, dealing with those Earth Ragers, making sure that they get dealt with very quickly, and just using the Ring of Peace in order to be able to kill them very quickly, as Azarok is casting his frontal ability, while Abrakeydabra here pulling those test subject rats there to get just the last little bit of count they need before proccing their last reaping of the instance.
Yeah, so a scout marker going off on one of those rats before they pulled them, just so all the DPS are on the same page. They just needed this one rat to get the reaping, so the scout marker come in, they all focus the one rat, they proc the reaping, they go on to the next boss, and they use their shadow meld. So good skip coming in here from Team Abrakeydabra, as we've seen some fails before from teams where one of them didn't get the shadow meld off, or they had to use another res. But 0 deaths here by Abrakeydabra, very clean run so far as they're engaging Rixa.
Yeah, Rix is actually kind of scary on Quaking, because you want to be in melee and you want to be kind of grouped up a large amount of the time, and the reason for that being is just because of how the chemical burn mechanic works. So basically the chemical burn mechanic will end up going on the two closest players, and you really want it to go on this protection warrior a lot of the time, and then you either want it to go on the monk whenever he does have his diffuse magic ability, or the rogues whenever they do have cloak, or somebody who has a pretty beefy defensive available to them. So basically making sure that those chemical burns get either spell reflected back onto Rixa Fluxflame, or it gets diffused, which will end up putting the chemical burns back onto Rixa as well, is very important. But it's very difficult to deal with, especially on this Quaking affix, because it ends up separating you out a lot of the time. Sometimes you end up having to be out of melee just because of how close and how tight this boss's hitbox is, plus the area denial passively just from that chemical that she does put on the ground there.
Yeah, this is usually why teams have a predetermined position where they're going to run to if they get the Quaking, especially because they're just 5 melee, right? Even the healer wants to stand in melee just because, you know, you want to do cat form damage, and you also want to be baiting the propelling blast. So as soon as you have a Quaking dungeon, those teams are probably going to have predetermined positions, say, hey, Dr. J, you're going to dodge to this side, and Divine Field going to dodge to this side, and so on. As we see, Swagfest actually going down. Now, they do have a battle rest available, so it's not going to be a huge deal, except the 5 seconds that they lose at this point. But Swagfish just had the debuff on him. Alster probably didn't have a Dispel ready, and maybe Swagfish was just the wrong person to get the debuff on them, because as you said, they can rotate their defensives to make sure to get rid of them. But Swagfish maybe just not having anything ready, maybe because it's a Quaking, as you said. It went on the wrong person, didn't have anything ready, and Alster was not able to out-heal it.
Yeah, which is super bad, because Alster is actually doing like 35-ish K HPS, which is a pretty sizable amount, especially since this is like a tyrannical Rixa Fluxflame. This fight is actually pretty dangerous for most tanks that are not prot warriors, just because of how that chemical burn mechanic does end up coming out. Most tanks not able to spell reflected back. No tank except for prot warrior able to spell reflected back on the Rixa, so that actually makes protection warrior actually super good for this fight. As we have seen on the side of Team Puolukka, they have recently pulled Rixa Fluxflame, being almost a boss behind Abrakeydabra here, as we do have Quaking going out on the whole entire group, but Rixa should be going down here shortly.
Yes, definitely. Abrakeydabra here, who are in the driver's seat, they are almost a whole boss ahead at this point. But we've seen Abrakeydabra struggle in Shrine, right? We had Elsra dying on 2 boss fights, almost costing him a boss at the very start, and then having to reset a boss at the very end. This was the only reason why they lost Shrine. So Abrakeydabra, they have to stay composed here. They have to do the last boss without having any Elsra deaths, because any other death can actually be, you can save other deaths because you have two battle rests available, right? So the only one that has to stay alive here is going to be Elsred.
Yep, and we actually do see those War Machines. They do have True Sight available, as Abrakeydabra does end up shrouding all the way through this instance here. We actually saw them have a pretty good quaking timing, allowing them to just give it, wait a second for the quaking, and then before they mounted up and ran all the way through here. Obviously, Shadow melting off all that trash there, as Elsred does top everybody off before pulling the final boss, Mogul Raz Dunk inside Motherlode here, while Team Puolukka, 54% on Rixa Flux Flame. Overall, that wipe ended up costing them so much time at the beginning of the instance. Abrakeedabra's Bloodlust is available. We obviously expect to see it whenever Raz Dunk does get below 50% though.
Yeah, so on this boss, I do think the most difficult job here is the healer's job because you have a full melee lineup, so all the missiles go on the healer. Now, all the melee and the tank, they don't have to care about the missile. They can always stand on top of the boss. They can run around whenever he does the frontal minigun. But elsewhere, he has to go out, bait the missile, make sure the melees don't get hit, then has to go back in, dodge the Gatling gun, go back out, and so on. And on top of that, of course, you also have to dodge the missiles that are coming out from the boom bots, as you can see them going off right now. So Elsewhere definitely has to make sure he stays alive here, as also the intermission phase is very dangerous because there's just so much AoE coming out.
Yeah, and additionally, those two adds end up putting a healing debuff on your player. Elsewhere gets hit by that honing missile. He Cat wild charges back into melee of Razdunk here, and quaking is just so obnoxious with this Gatling gun. This is like the third time we've actually seen it in combination with the Gatling gun, requiring everybody to be able to kind of spread out. And we actually do see Dr. Day hitting 4% as he does dip back through the Gatling gun cast because he's like so spread from the boss. So basically, most of the time you want to be close to the boss in order to make the circle that you have to draw around Razdunk a little bit smaller just because of the Gatling gun. But the quaking again, just making this boss so hard for Abrakeydabra, while Team Puolukka is finally downing Rixa Flux Flame.
Yeah, this is really why quaking is such a difficult affix, especially in tyrannical dungeons. We kept talking about sanguine, but on bosses, quaking is just so annoying, and so many things can go wrong because it's RNG. Like, you can have really bad RNG, have quaking overlap with something else where you need to either be stacked up, and then quaking requires you to spread out, or with the Gatling gun that we've seen here, or with the debuffs on Rixa as we've seen before, or you just have a lot of damage on top of something else. Maybe you get hit by a missile on top of having the quaking, preventing the healer to really cast anything because it will interrupt you. On top of that, also doing damage once it procs. So definitely gotta watch out for the intermission phase as they drop really low whenever the boss goes down on one of those pillars. Really, as you see Elsred struggling to heal the players up every time the boss goes down.
Yep, and Puolukka has a casualty whenever they're doing their skip here. After Rixa, they end up having their rogue ending up falling down here. He's going to end up getting mass rest here in just a second. As Abrakeydabra does end up killing that last pillar, we saw a really good POV from our OBS team of up above Razdunk whenever he was dropping those pillars, as we do see Bloodlust pop for Abrakeydabra as they get out of the intermission, trying to make sure that Razdunk does die as quickly as possible, because like we were saying, melee uptime is kind of limited just because of how melee restrictive quaking ends up being, just because of how big the boss's hitbox is. So making sure that you do pop the Bloodlust and deal with Razdunk very quickly is a very good use of Bloodlust. But we ended up only seeing 2 Bloodlusts in a 23:55 dungeon for Abrakeydabra, 5-ish minute dungeon here for Abrakeydabra, which is definitely something we should definitely be critical of. But Puolukka popping their Bloodlust on the first part of Razdunk, definitely a little bit interesting, as the shine ends up getting pretty low for Abrakeydabra, but it looks like it's going to be okay here as the Gatling gun is coming out as well.
Okay, so Elsred is actually completely out of mana at this point, but as you mentioned earlier, this boss really doesn't do a lot of damage as long as you avoid all the mechanics. Now, Elsred only really has to heal the quaking damage, he has to heal tank damage, and himself whenever a missile is coming out. But they mounted the boss so hard because of this Bloodlust that they had available to them, so it really shouldn't be a problem to finish up the boss here. And we gotta say, it's a very clean run by Abrakeydabra here, definitely showing the redemption here compared to Shrine, where they just had so many mistakes and so much, like, struggling so hard. Just having such a clean MOTHERLODE run and winning the series here 2-1.
Yep, and the last mob does go down here at the very end of Mogul Razdunk, and Abrakeydabra does claim it.
Ominously approaching for the team here, and Nagura, of course, I'm sure you noted that I am wearing a different tie. Unfortunately, I had a bit of a wardrobe malfunction backstage with some of the sauce from the delicious food at lunch. But nonetheless, let's get started with the dungeon here as both teams head off in the guaranteed top left opening of Waycrest Manor, diving straight into the Sisters, wasting no time. Method and A here on the left.
Yeah, seeing a very similar pull to Method, actually the exact same pull that Method EU did earlier, where they pulled a Triad boss with both of the Acolytes and the Toads on the left and right side. Now, we talked about this, that it is dangerous because of the 50% healing reduction aura that the first witch that is active with the Ares has here, or applies to the whole group. But as they have so much damage, and on a 45 setting, they just push the boss so fast, the healing reduction aura is gone within a couple of seconds.
Yeah, and they have certainly enough crowd control to deal with any trash that might be dangerous during that time. Games Revolted with a more, I wouldn't say traditional, but certainly a strat that we've seen more commonly in the past few cups here at the spring season, have actually gone with the trash of the guards and the captains down the left hall here, and have popped their own Bloodlust as well. So both teams' Bloodlust is down. Games Revolted will likely try to proc their first Reaping and take that on top of the Sister Triad boss here, whilst Method and A now dealing with their second round of Sister, so phase 2 of the fight.
Yeah, Games Revolted doing more of another strategy where they do use the Bloodlust for trash alone. Now, we've seen that before in previous cups where people just go in, kind of ignore the trash, just do the trash first, use the Bloodlust for it, and Games Revolted are pulling the boss with the Acolytes too from the left side here. Now, we've seen Limit do this pull earlier without the Bloodlust, and they actually had a full team wipe coming in. So we'll see how Games Revolted does this now, having the Acolytes on top of the boss and no Bloodlust available to them, but they got rid of of Sister Selena here. They got her to 50%, meaning they're done with the 50% healing reduction aura, and it should be okay for them to clean up this pull here.
And they only pulled one of the Acolytes as well, not both sides of the room, so we'll see if they decide to pull the second one. I don't know if that'll be actually enough to proc their first Reaping. I don't think it will. Method and A grabbing what I believe are the guard captains back into the hall with these Soul Essences, so exact same pull as the Method EU counterpart. Interesting to see from the sister or brother team here on the NA counterpart for Method EU as they deal with, once again, the sufficient trash pool in the hall. Soul Essence is having a much lower health pool than the corresponding guards, and captains will die faster, get through that enraging faster. We can see Nerf Clap, of course, taking it a bit slow here. Now that we are reaching that enraging, mobs doing 100% increased damage, sub 30%, can really whack the tank quite hard.
Yeah, very interesting to see that Method EU and Method NA actually are playing the same exact strategy here. I wonder why that is. But interestingly enough, Waycrest, in the time trials, Waycrest was actually done in 19 minutes and 51 seconds by Method NA, compared to Method EU just having this stellar time of 17 minutes and something. So Method NA is still 2 minutes slower than Method EU, so we're probably going to see some slower pulls later on, while Method NA had this huge trash on boss pulls. As we see, Rock's actually going down for Games Revolted.
Rock's going down, and Asmin going down as well, just after getting the battle res up. So fortunately, the tank is up. They might be able to get this kill off just at the end here. 40% having to make sure to make interrupt, but Curry Monk goes down as well. Adak might be going down here in just a moment. Speed of Life proccing that cheat death from the Jagged Nettles. Adak just barely hanging on for health. They've snowballed completely into 4 stacks of Grievous right now and are barely holding on for dear life as Rux once again is ramped up to 4 stacks of Grievous. The one unfortunate downside of Protware as well, they just have no way to really raise that health pool outside of freezing their health a lot with Ignore Pain and just as much defense as they could pack on, and it's just not enough as a full team wipe, heartbreakingly, right at the last finish line of the Triad for Games Revolted. They will have to run back over and do the entire boss again. Method NA now dominantly in the courtyard, doing an equally large pull to Method EU and just getting ready with that shield wall to get everything down.
Such a devastating wipe coming back Games Revolted. You just hate to see it when you wipe at the very last percentage of the boss, just having to do everything all over again. But they pulled one of the Acolytes onto the boss at the very last second, and that is what really caused them to wipe. So just it is trying to get this efficient pull, getting the mobs on top of the boss at the very last boss being alive, at the very last witch being alive, and just having a complete wipe, just costing them so much here, pulling the Acolyte on top. While Method and A on the other side, Zero Dabs having a very clean run so far. They are in the courtyard now, dealing with their first Reaping wave and some of the trash.
This is such a deja vu right now because Method NA is doing pretty much the exact same pulls as Method EU. Nice flawless run so far, 0 deaths, and Games Revolted pretty much having the same wipe for the same reasons as Limit on the right side. There are 6 deaths on the board, so they're once again back on the Triad, working through Sister Briar for the first time, or I suppose the 3rd time at this point. Method NA grabbing some more trash out from the Rawl Hall and bringing it into the room. If they do follow suit to the Method EU pulse here, we'll expect that they're going to proc their 40% Reaping and then grab that on top of Soulbound Goliath and the mini boss that lies right in front of it, Matron Brindle as well. So pretty substantial pull that could be coming out from the team in just a moment as Nerf Clap pulls the remaining 3 Thorn Shaper / Thorn Guard combo in the corner.
Yeah, this corner pack gets skipped by quite a lot of teams because, you know, those Thorn Shapers are just very annoying to deal with. You have those casts that need to be interrupted. You have the I think poison thorns or something like that, injected thorns they need to interrupt. Then you also have the soul fetish coming out. There's just so many casts that are annoying. Then also heal, uproot. So that's why usually teams, or a lot of teams, skip those kind of mobs and deal with other trash later on. But Method and A actually dealing with those thorn shapers. I wonder, they're probably going to proc their reaping with this. And then, as you said, they might pull it on top of the boss and have this huge like mini boss plus reaping pool, which is definitely something that didn't work out for Method U every single time.
Yeah, so they wiped 2 weeks ago on it, but this week did it successfully. And here we go, exact same pull here from Method NA as they grab the second reaping on top of Matron Brindle, the 3 Thorn kind of hounds as well, and the Soulbound Goliath looking to get everything down. They don't have that Bloodlust available, but certainly would have saved at least offensive cooldowns for this huge amounts of damage coming out of Nerf Clap the Protware, and now finally Shakib the Unholy DK rocketing just slightly above him as well. So heavy damage really carried there by not only the Unholy DK but Thunderclap from the Protware. Games Revolted certainly still holding their own, 21% on trash as they've now moved into the courtyard and have done a pretty aggressive pull as well.
Yeah, same thing here coming up on Method and A. JB going into the cat form to make sure he doesn't get hit by this spike. When Brindle goes under 30%, he immediately used Soothe to get rid of the Enrage effect to make sure Nerf Club actually stays alive, because this is a lot of tank damage here. Not only do you have all the trash mobs, but you also have the boss Goliath, who does increasing tank damage because he over time just buffs himself and increases damage done. As you can see, him actually getting dragged into the fire to get rid of the stacks and just kind of having this AoE damage on the group.
Yeah, 5% per stack indeed. So you do clean the stacks with the AoE, as Nagura mentioned, and surprised to see them do it so early because the tanks are usually quite resilient, especially warrior tanks versus this boss. But I guess they're just erring on the side of safety. We did see that he used that shield wall earlier with those 3 shields surrounding him, and once that faded off, he decided to just play it safe and get into that fire. Games Revolted here, just dealing with the rest of their first reaping wave. So obviously a fair bit behind after that first wipe. 6 deaths behind, so 30 seconds on the board that they need to cover up as well, as we see their tank Rux run into the hallway, grab a lot of trash, the entire hallway almost, and just come right back out with that Swift Foot Potion. A lot of damage on the way in as well, so good for him to survive that as the Ring of Peace is laid in front of the door to make sure that all the trash is nicely grouped up.
Yeah, this Ring of Peace is very nice. We've seen it before from the team, just making sure, because all the mobs don't arrive at the very same time, right? So you want to make sure that you have the Ring of Peace to delay the first mobs a little bit, so once the last mobs come in, they actually arrive at the very same time, so you can have the AoE stuns at the same time, you have the damage on all of them at the same time. So very good control coming out of Games Revolted here. Now, Method and A are about to kill Goliath here. They are in 46% trash, so they're just so far ahead at this point. They're one boss ahead, and they're also ahead in trash percentage. So it's definitely Method and A that are the driver's seat here, and they have a very good time so far. So let's see how they're going to do against Method U's time here.
Yeah, so let's see if they even end up doing the same pull. So this is where they kind of build up and work towards that pull. So if they're going to get just sub 60% worth of trash and then try to proc their third reaping into the Rawls room along with all of the trash there, Bloodlust, everything, and just try to get that huge pull that we saw not only Method U do, but Team D do as well, if I'm not mistaken, 3 weeks ago, I believe, on East Cup #1. Nonetheless, we'll see if they're able to pull it off, if they even do that in the first place. Games Revolted has procced their second reaping pack from trash, pulled it into Soulbound Goliath along with Matron Brindle, exact same pull that we've seen Method and A do just moments before, and they are still working towards that as Method and A now just hit 50%. A lot of enraging mobs in here along with these peasants that not only do a ton of damage, but when they die they will spawn 3 extra maggots on the ground.
Yeah, so one thing to note about this strategy, pretty much copying Method U at this point, is just the time that they had. I've talked about it earlier when Method U was playing, that it was bad for Method U to already reveal their strategy to the broadcast, because they were so much faster in Waycrest compared to anyone else in the time trials. And I think all the teams were just kind of wondering, what is Method U doing in this dungeon? But then they had to play it as one of their very first maps on the broadcast, and the other teams were just able to watch them and see what they're doing. So Method and A didn't have to play up until now, meaning they had time to practice off stream. So maybe they saw Method U's strategy and they were like, you know what, we're gonna do this too. And then they just went to the tournament realms, tried out the strategy, and now they're doing it on broadcast too.
Well, unfortunately, Yoda does go down and he does not have that cheat death available. So battle res comes up from JB, making sure to get him nice and healthy. But Nerf Clad dips, unfortunately, quite low, sub 20%, as he just backpedal kites back into the hall once again, likely to prepare the same pull as Method U. I don't know, Nagura. This isn't the kind of thing you just kind of on a whim practice.
2 hours.
Yeah, they had a few hours. You know, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It's also possible their slower time trials were just, you know, just didn't work out in the 5 pulls that they had, but they tried it. So we'll see if they manage to pull it off here. But it is quite clear, at least, that they seem to be getting ready for this kind of pull. A lot of damage coming in on Nerf Clap. He just can't seem to get out of that 4 stack of Grievous as JB just keeps pumping healing into him. A lot of enrages going on with the rest of the mobs right now. Really important for them as well to kill everything at the same time here because they're only 1% away. But Nerf Clap just dropping so low right now. JB's having a lot of trouble healing him.
Yeah, so on Games Revolted side, unfortunately, they had to reset the boss tree. They had to reset Goliath because they had the tank death coming in, they had a DPS tank death come in, and they just didn't have any battle rests available to them anymore. So they had to end up resetting Goliath, had to get everyone back up and engage the boss again. So at this point, Games Revolted definitely way far behind here as they're on 44% trash only, didn't even kill Goliath yet. Method and A procced a 60% reaping wave, just deal with the mobs here, with the marksmen, which they actually had a lot of trouble with the last time around. Last week, 2 weeks ago, sorry, they actually lost Waycrest to Method EU just because they wiped to those marksman pulls because they didn't get an interrupt off. JB got hit by a trap or something like that. So definitely cleaning up their marksman pulls here and just making sure they're not wiping to those same mistakes again.
Certainly a much more modest version of the pulls we saw earlier. They actually deal with the Reaping Wave first. They've put some world markers down, and now they're dealing with all of the trash and Rawls Rune plus Rawl. Here comes the Bloodlust. A lot of damage coming in on top of Nerf right now as the pre-CD's going in, making sure that he's nice and safe. We get the punt out with the Ring of Peace just to make sure he doesn't get too much damage on him, as a lot of the mobs in rage right now should keep trying to get as much damage in as he can, just not the same levels of damage, but also not the same amount of mobs. Of course, the Reaping is not in here. Halfway through the Bloodlust right now as they look to stabilize and have pulled off the rest of this. You know, it kind of seems like the way it seemed to me that they were indeed preparing for this kind of pull with Reaping. Why else would they drag that top pack all the way down to the hall and get ready for it? But I think things just didn't go very well. JB didn't have time to go and drink because so much damage came in on Nerf Clap. So I do feel like they were actually intending on doing the same pull as Method EU and Team D, but they just didn't feel comfortable doing it in the end. It didn't line up, so they just took it slow, especially because at this point I'm sure that they know that they're substantially ahead of Games Revolted.
Yeah, we also got to talk about tanking just in general when you do those huge pulls. I know, like, the numbers are the one that are oh my god, look at the damage, 1 million DPS, right? But the tanks are doing a very difficult job on those kind of pulls too. If you saw now, before having the Reaping, having all those mobs, plus the boss, it's just an insane amount of damage coming into the tank, and any small mistake will kill you, basically. So if you turn your back on one of the mobs, get a hit in the back, or you get a hit in the back from the boss, or anything like that, well, huge mistake will kill you, and then you have all those mobs raging at the same time too. So those tanks having a very difficult job just staying alive when you do those huge pulls. So maybe what happened was Nerf Club just didn't have defenses ready enough and said, you know what, no, we're not going to do this pull. I just don't have defenses. I'm not comfortable doing it.
Speaking of issues here, Games Revolted tank does go down, Rux, and causes Adak, of course, to be the secondary and threat, go down right away as well. The team runs out of the room, resetting Rawl. They probably committed a lot of resources to that pull, and it looks like another full wipe coming out of that team. So 15 deaths on the board now as Method and A cleans up the rest of Rawl plus the Rune Weaver from the kitchen.
Yeah, so once Rawl goes down here, they only need 19% trash. Actually, once they kill a Rune Weaver, they can skip the rest of the trash. So it's the exact same thing as we've seen from Method EU earlier. They just need to finish off the switch. They go into the second to last boss's room, clear all this trash there, clear the horrors, and then they're going to be done. So they don't have to do any sort of backtracking. They're just after this Rune Weaver. As we see the Sooth come out, there we go. It took him a while to use the Sooth, but it came out from JB here as the rage got dispelled by the Rune Weaver.
He's probably just mad at Nerf Clap that he wasn't ready for the big pull and decided, you know what, you deal with the enrage yourself. They do head downstairs, exact same pull pattern as Method EU here as they'll go all the way downstairs. Gonna be curious to see if they pull the boss on top of the remaining trash downstairs. But, you know, any kind of big, risky ooh and ah pull that we've seen before, there's really no point in Method and A doing right now and potentially choking or throwing or having any issues.
No.
So, I mean, but at this point they could, especially if Games Revolted just keeps having these kind of issues here as they get in, and Asmund goes down right away. Rux follows suit, and the rest of the team wipes yet again, hitting 20 deaths here on the right side. So a lot of struggles coming out of them. Once again, Method and A does not play it too aggressively, pulls all the trash downstairs here, but not with Lord and Lady Waycrest.
Yeah, I definitely like Method and A here not doing anything risky at this point, because really why? I mean, if anyone is looking at the other stream, just seeing the 20 deaths, seeing they didn't even kill Ral yet, they're just so far behind. So Method NA definitely just play safe at this point. And also, like, not only is it good to play safer just so you don't have any wipes or anything go wrong, really, but they also just kind of disclose your strategy, really, because other teams that are watching might be like, oh, maybe they can't do the pull with the boss. Maybe they're just not able to do it. So we don't have to do it either because we're not going to be slower than them. But maybe they can do it, and they're just not showing it because at this point they're so far ahead, so they don't have to, right?
Perhaps it is indeed a classic situation of debating from Method NA here, trying to lure teams into a false sense of security and then really just kind of putting it into last gear. Method NA here, Lord Waycrest down to 50% for the second time at 35%, of course. Lady Waycrest will siphon her health back into Lord Waycrest, restoring it. She does this 3 times afterwards, joining the fight in the second phase at 10%, and the teams will have to hopefully efficiently cleave them down. Some opt to just kind of kill Lord Waycrest as quickly as possible because the tank damage can get a bit out of hand. Games Revolted finally back on roll on the right side of the screen, on the small screen, dealing with what they can for the, I guess, 4th time they've pulled this boss, 3rd or 4th time. They've had a lot of struggles, but they keep going at it and pulling the trash along with the boss rather than taking it slow. At this point, Nagura, they must just figure we're all in. We got to do what we can. Let's just make risky plays and hope Method NA has a couple of wipes.
Yeah, so 20 deaths coming in for Games Revolted, definitely a disaster for them. We've seen Limit struggle in this dungeon too. It's really not easy at all. Waycrest on a 45 setting is already difficult, but then you also have the affixes like Raging, making it even more difficult, and Grievous at the same time. So those affixes are no joke, especially Grievous on a lot of fights it's just so annoying for the healer because as you see here in Lady Waycrest and Lord Waycrest, usually it's not a lot of damage on a 45 setting, but the problem is you always have to heal people to full HP as soon as any sort of damage happens on the team, and it just, it costs you damage as a healer because you can't be in cat form all the time. You need to make sure everyone is topped so Grievous doesn't stack up, and it's just an annoying affix, really. As we can see them pull the horse here, and we saw Method EU actually have some struggle the last time around.
Yeah, Nerf Clap getting so low here, 6% as well, as JB just tries to pump as much healing as possible. They're getting ready with some crowd control on these Gloom Horrors right now. We have had somebody's bargain, the cheat death trinket procced already on Nerf Clap, so he's quite vulnerable. Shield wall finally does go up right now as the mobs enrage and they cleave the rest of them down. We saw how dangerous that was with Method EU as well, where they pulled Gorak Tool on top of it. So a lot of danger coming in. It did cost them the trinket, but frankly, at this point, they've already done 100%. They shadow melded the final reaping pack off and have headed off to Gorak Tool, which is, of course, in this fortified environment. So the chances of Nerf Clap dying here and eating that trinket is really quite low. Oh, it looks like they didn't actually shadow meld the reaping. So the reaping does come in on top of the boss. Helps, of course, with Shakib's damage, and they just are going to close this one out as quickly as possible.
Yeah, this boss, we didn't really see any team struggle so far except Method U, but they pulled the horrors on top of it, which of course was the reason why they had a tank death coming in. So Method NA probably not going to have a huge problem here, as they only have to deal with the Reaping and the Slavers here. The Slavers are the boss mobs that are spawning throughout the fight. Now, they constantly target a person and cast an ability. If it's not being interrupted, then they will just kind of channel a stun on the person. So it's definitely very important that you make sure you interrupt the Slavers. You can interrupt it with Typhoon, any sort of knockback, and any sort of stun. So they probably have a rotation in place, and they're probably not going to have any of those stuns come through. And once the Slavers die, you actually want to collect those lanterns that are spawning around the room to burn their bodies, because if you don't burn them, the boss will revive them once in a while.
Yeah, certainly a fight that can snowball out of hand quite quickly, but Method NA, in typical Method NA fashion, looking quite nice and dominant here in their first game. Certainly don't have any issues or don't need to kind of shake off any cold play early in the tournament. They're looking to get right into it. Only one death, a quite successful Waycrest Manor coming out of them, Nagura. And, it did look like their pull pattern was pretty much on par with Method EU, minus pulling trash with the bosses, so a bit of aggression lost there. It begs to ask, did they do that only because they knew they were comfortably ahead, or was it never part of their strategy initially?
Yeah, we will see later on when they have to play against a team that isn't wiping on the very first boss a couple of times. If it's a closer match, we will see if Method NA can actually pull off the same things that we saw from Method EU earlier, as they kill the boss here and have a clean 1-0 against Games Revolted here.
With rather limited time and further practice.
Yeah, and Method NA going to be trying to seal up this series early in Game 2 on Atal'Dazar.
So both teams right now, we know we're in Fortified every week here, Nagura, on Atal'Dazar, so not at all surprised to see the mass pull of Augurs coming in, as well as that gets down to 2% health on Games Revolted right now. Both healers up on that sterile, making sure that the Juggernauts don't charge and cleave them down. Bloodlust has been popped on both sides.
Yeah, so one thing to note here that they did kind of a bigger pull. They actually had a Stalker too on Games Revolted side, so a huge pull coming in. They pulled the Invisible Stalker who patrols on the right side on top of this pack here, and they also pulled the Augur on top, which we've seen being CC'd on, I think it was Abrakeydabra who CC'd it earlier. I might be wrong though. Now Games Revolted did use their Bloodlust and Method and Aid too, but this huge pull is very impressive by both of those teams.
And beautifully amounts of balance damage coming out of that Prot Warrior, topping damage well above the 3 DPS in the group. Huge amounts coming out of Nerf Clap as Method and Aid heroically heads down towards the swords, and of course Razan, the first or often first boss of the dungeon that we see, immediately jumping off, but misses his snap location and needs to immediately Swiftfoot Potion and get back up there to grab the swords as well. So second time's a charm for him as he remounts and gets on there. We'll just pretend that never happened. Games Revolted on the right side of the screen has actually moved up to the Colossus pull that Teddles was touting earlier.
Yeah, so thankfully they didn't have the rogues pull the swords yet, as he was missing the jump, right? Because if you pull the swords and the tank is not actually in position and he falls off, the swords will snap to the tank's position downstairs, and that will be a horrible mistake. So good recovery here by Method and Aid as Nerf Clap was missing that jump, kind of. The rogues waiting for Nerf Clap to be in position and then pull them off with tricks in the trade as they pulled the first Reaping Wave on top of Razan now.
Yeah, they almost had a pretty bad situation with the patrol of Razan. Razan was almost on the back side of the room, and that's because of that initial missed snap location. So you can see just how well and how planned this team has gotten everything down to the wire. Just a few seconds mistake there almost cost them that extra patrol timing, and it would have snowballed into extra time loss. But Games Revolted has popped their first Reaping as well with the Colossus pull, and is actually working their way up the path towards Priestess Alunza. So not the most common strategy that you see, but certainly can be very effective in terms of trash count. Now, whether or not you make that work well with the Colossus and how much of a pain in the butt it is, we'll have to see if it works out for them. But Adak has unfortunately been hit by one of the Shadow Smashes from the Lost Soul, so he will have 20% decreased health for that 1 minute. Method and A doing well once again to line of sight the every 30-second AoE fear cast from Razan as it gets down to 50%.
Yeah, very interesting strategy coming out from Games Revolted here with the Colossus, as we've seen from Fourty K before, as Sours mentioned earlier. Now, one thing to note here as well is that Fourty K once you kill both the Colossus, and then they switch their strategy up to only kill one of them and then actually go on the other side of the room. But Games Revolted killing both and then actually just going into this Priestess room, changing up their strategy completely, basically, compared to all the other teams. So they're doing this huge Priestess Alunza pull here without having their Bloodlust available, meaning that this is going to be very difficult on them because they just don't have this extra boost from Bloodlust.
Yeah, they have to be careful. This Juggernaut came in a bit late right now, and we are in a bolstering setting, meaning every mob that dies will buff everything around it by 20% remaining health and damage. So it's really important that everything's cleaved down evenly. Even the last few mobs you can see here are doing a ton of damage to the tank. Shield Wall has been popped, and even that sliver of health is very misleading. It's actually a fair bit of HP that they have to chew through. This Skull Juggernaut is going to be quite the boss to deal with right now, as he's just hammering away at Rugs. Quaking coming up right now. They have to be careful to heal him through it, as the second Reaping pack has procced on top of this Juggernaut. Immediately they turn around and run right into Priestess Alunza, bring her over, and grab everything together. This is actually looking quite nice and efficient. I really like this strategy coming out of Games Revolted right now. I've seen this spun around a few times on live servers. I've looked at it myself too, so it's nice to see some teams kind of checking this out. We'll have to see how the rest of the routing goes for them and where they choose to hop down to Razan. But Method and A has finished off Razan and is now moving into more traditional means up towards Volkal's wing.
Yeah, I feel like if you want to pull off the strategy of pulling the Colossi, then it's going to be on a bolstering setting, right? Because on bolstering, you can't do those huge pulls anyway. And if you want to pull the Colossus, then you need to single target it down anyway, because it has so much more HP than the other mobs. So it's kind of goes hand in hand with the bolstering ethics. And it just seems to be working out for Games Revolted as they're being really fast. Not only are they on Priestess already, but they're 49% trash compared to Method and A on 25% trash. Of course, Method killed Razan already, so we're going to have completely different routes between those two teams, and it's going to be a little bit hard to compare those two and to see who is ahead, but I do believe Games Revolted kind of saved a lot of time just from doing this kind of Colossi pull.
Yeah, it's really neat to see. Just that's what I like about this dungeon. It's just so open in terms of the first three bosses. It's just essentially a big square dungeon. I mean, some of the paths are certainly not encouraged with a lot of the honor guards on the right side here that Method is working towards. But they're at 37%, have moved into Volkal's room right now, and are getting ready to chew through that phase 1 where you have to kill all 3 reanimation totems at the same time. Else they will cast for 6 seconds and heal themselves to full. So you want to make sure you coordinate that well. Games are Revolted now at 5% on Priestess Alunza. We'll be finishing her off. I predict here, Nagura, that what's going to happen is they're going to take their 49% downstairs, proc 60% reaping, and then jump down to Razan with that 60% reaping. So we'll have to see if they follow suit on that.
Yeah, that would be definitely very efficient if they pull the reaping on top of Razan, as we've seen numerous times from other teams. As Method is doing more of just standard strategy, as we've seen from the 2 teams before come out as well, and Abrakeydabra. And then Method 37% trash, so they didn't proc their second reaping wave yet, as they're dealing with the totems here in phase 1. Now with the totems, you just want to make sure you kill them within a couple of seconds of each other so they don't heal. So Volkal actually gets activated, and now in this second phase, we've seen teams, you know, just kind of save their offensive cooldowns because the boss slowly kills himself, and then you also have this AoE that goes down on the groups and those pulls that you need to dodge.
Really nice pull coming out of Games Revolted here. They pulled both of the sword packs and sapped crowd control the Screamer to make sure that it doesn't get bolstered. Snap the swords, kill them all together, and then the 2 Augur pack that they had stealth pressed previously along with the 2 honor guards, they pulled that on top of the pre-crowd controlled Sky Screamers and now are cleaving everything down together because those have the same amount of health, so they don't really have to worry about bolstering. There's 2 reasons they want to cleave everything down at the same time here. Not only for bolstering, of course, but they want to make sure that they proc reaping at the same time by everything dying, so they will likely grab the reaping. We can see one of the rogues actually just jump down over the side of the bridge to distract Razan in position so that they can just jump down right on top of him, take that 60% reaping, and get started on Razan. Rug's getting chunked quite a bit, though, before going downstairs because of the mass amount of bolstering. There's the reaping, and down they go into Razan's pit.
Yeah, so one thing to note with bolstering as well is that not only do the mobs do more damage, but also get more HP. So bolstering is just one of those aspects, kind of like Sanguine, where you lose so much time if you mismanage the HP of mobs. So that's why you see them trying to kill everything evenly, and even if you bolster the mobs on low HP, it still costs time, right? So you definitely want to make sure you try to not bolster them, or if you have to bolster them at the very last second. And one more thing to note is the CC that is coming in from the teams. Now, the only true CC in the game is Sap from Rogue and a Demon Hunter's Cage. So those true CCs actually make the mobs not be in combat or in fight with you, while all the other CCs like Blind or the CC from the Monk coming out will actually mean that they are still in combat with you, they're just CC'd. So if you kill mobs close to a CC target that is not Sap, then they actually will get bolstered still. So it's very important that if you CC any sort of mobs and you want to kill mobs close to them while they are CC'd, it has to be a Sap from the Rogue coming out to make sure that they're not getting bolstered.
Yeah, so Games Revolted a bit of a hiccup, unfortunately, when they jumped down. I think the Monk just took a bit too much falling damage and did die, so they had to use the Battle Res right away. Of course, they were already in combat from that 3rd Reaping Wave, running all the way around the side of the arena just to join them down here at Razan. But everything seemed to work out for them in the end, as Razan is at 44%. Method just now finishing up their 2nd Reaping Wave, which they procced with one of the more dangerous trash pulls in the dungeon, where you have the double Stalker, double Witch Doctor, and of course the double Shield Bearers down there. There comes the rest of the Reaping right now, and they're going to get ready to move over through the hallway and proc their 3rd Reaping soon.
Yeah, so Games Revolted is on 28% on Razan here. Razan, not a very dangerous boss fight as long as you don't get eaten whenever the pursuit is on you, which shouldn't really happen for those kind of teams. I think we saw it actually happen one time for Method but they did manage to recover there. So Games Revolted is about to kill off Razan as they pulled those 2 Sky Screamers on top to just get some extra percentage here. Now, we of course are in a bolstering setting, so you don't want to kill mobs on top of bosses, but you can pull mobs on top of the boss when the boss is approximately the same amount of HP as the mob that you're going to pull. Because if you kill the boss and then the mob dies at the same time, then nothing's getting bolstered, and you just killed something very efficiently.
So Method with their own efficiency coming out here as they pull 10 swords over to the snap location. Here comes this Quaking, though. Really bad timing. Nerf Clap dips quite low. Shakib does proc his cheat death as well. They're trapped there in the corner, of course, with the snapped swords, and they had to sit there. So swords were starting to bolster on top of a splash Quaking. Here come the 2 Sky Screamers that they crowd controlled on the side. And unfortunately, they fear it in the corner right now. Are they looking to just kind of Shadow Meld it off? Yeah, so it looks like they're just going to kind of crowd control and Shadow Meld it off. Indeed, finally, the Shadow Meld comes in from Method 57% on the board board for them. So they're just on the cusp of popping their third reaping, whilst Games Revolted is doing actually the same pull upstairs, multiple swords, and has already dealt with their third reaping wave and Razan. Lighty taking a bit of damage coming in here from the swords, though.
Yeah, Games Revolted are 75%, so they're very far ahead on trash percentage compared to Method NA. Now, only 5% left to proc their 80% Reaping Wave as they're on their way to pull those next sword packs. We see the sap coming in on those Sky Screamers, so he's true to seed, not gonna get bolstered by any of those mobs. And then we see another sap coming out on another Sky Screamer, so they can kill the swords here without bolstering the Sky Screamers. They are using the snap location to make sure that all the swords are stacked up. This is so important in a bolstering setting that you are using these snap locations, because if they always jump around, then you're going to have different kinds of damage on the swords, and you're going to kill some earlier than others. So snapping two sword packs together just means not only are they not jumping, but they also just stacked up, and you can do so much more efficient damage to them.
Yeah, no, really well done here by both teams. Games Revolted has procted their fourth Reaping Wave. The two Sky Screamers along with it. Here comes the rest of the Reaping out of the sides of the map as we see a third Sky Screamer off screen just pulled by Adak, one of the two rogues. He had his defensive running as he's tricks of the trading it over to Rux, making sure to transfer that threat. A lot of damage coming in on the rogue as Yoda pops his cheat death on the side of Method and on the left side there, trying to cleave everything effectively down together and proc their fourth Reaping Wave soon. These packs, of course, we've seen Games Revolted deal with well early into the map as they approached the dungeon from the opposite direction. Neat to see from them. 82% now on the board for Games Revolted as they cleave everything else down. They need to head up to Volcall, whilst Method and needs to head up to Priestess Alunza.
Yeah, Method and having a lot of bolstering stacks here on this pull that they did here with the Sky Screamers on top of those other mobs. So definitely got to watch out for the tank damage here coming in as they're all being bolstered. Now, one thing to mention here is that yes, Games Revolted is ahead in trash percentage, but I do believe that the bosses that those teams have to kill are actually, it will take longer for Games Revolted to kill Volcall compared to Method and killing Priestess Alunza, because I think Priestess Alunza just dies so fast with the transfusion coming in, while Volcall actually has phase one where you deal with the totems and then you deal with the boss, and you can't pull anything on top of Volcall really. So even if Games Revolted is ahead in trash, I think Method is not that far behind at all.
No, not far behind, but there's definitely also a bit of mismanagement from bolstering coming out of Games Revolted right now. They killed the two Witch Doctors very early on when the rest of the mobs were at 40% health, so two bolstering stacks for these quite beefy shield bearers and stalkers right now. There's a lot of damage coming in on Rux. They cleave everything else down, 98% on the board. They are done with trash at this point outside of the one Sky Screamer that they've likely left alive before going to Yasma. So they're going to get right in the room with Volcall. They're going to run in there, they're going to Shadow Meld, and they're going to get ready to pull this boss and try to finish it off. Method still dealing with the Bloodlust that they've already popped in order to deal with the mass trash pull before Priestess Alunza. So this is a pretty big advantage as well for Games Revolted here in Nagura. They have their Bloodlust available for the last boss, something that Method and A had to use for the trash here.
Yeah, so there's going to be two bosses left for both of those teams. The only thing left for Method and A is going to be this trash that you can see is the seat in the back. I think it's one Augur that is the seat in the back here. There's just a caster you don't want to deal with on top of the rest of the trash because there's too many interrupts at once. So they're probably going to wait until Priestess Alunza a little bit lower, then they will pull them up on top to make sure they're, of course, not bolstering her. And then Games Revolted only has the two bosses left and probably one Sky Screamer they're going to pull on top of Yasma here. So both of those teams very close to one another. But as I said earlier, Priestess Alunza is probably a boss that dies faster than Volcall, as we only need one or two more transfusions coming in from Method and A, while Games Revolted just now engaged the second phase.
There's a bit of advantage for Volcall here, which is why we can see they're not popping their Bloodlust. We do know that Volcall has that aura that not only damages the players, but himself as well. So essentially both bosses have a mechanic that helps the players by the bosses killing themselves and doing the players' work for them. Priestess Alunza just now getting her second transfusion in for 25% up for health, and there it goes down right now. She's down to 17, so they still have a bit of time to go on her. 17% health on her is actually a fair bit just because of that transfusion mechanic. 42% on Volcall for Games Revolted. This is really close. Both teams right now have one death on the board. Favor to Method and A, of course, because they have two battle reses just in case they need them. But Games Revolted still has that Bloodlust, which is going to be a significant advantage against Yasma.
Definitely. It's just this Bloodlust going to come out for Games Revolted, just making sure they gain so much single target value compared to Method and A. But Method and A killed the boss slightly earlier compared to Games Revolted. Now Games Revolted also has to do some a Shroud skip, sorry. So it's going to cost them a little bit of time because there's no member that could go earlier there to trigger the last boss event, because there's a little bit of RP role-playing going on, so you need to go close to the stairs, make sure you proc it, to make sure that your whole team can run up to the last boss. Now, Method and A did make sure to pull it a little bit earlier, because JB was able to leave the priestess room before the boss died. Now, Games Revolted didn't manage to have anyone leave earlier because they needed to shroud past the trash, which you can't do. You can't go invisible in the middle of a boss fight, right? So NA already engaging Yasma, while Games Revolted still dealing with the Sky Screamer here.
Can't go invisible. Stack 5 rogues and vanish. The Games Revolted here proccing their 5th Reaping Wave, Shadow melding it off and going up to Yasma, something that Method and A has already started on, but they still have 3% trash left. They'll have to deal with the skip of the 5th Reaping Wave and the last trash somewhere either throughout this fight. I'm not sure if they pulled the Sky Screamer. I didn't manage to see, so it might be waiting for them on the side there with a Paralyze from Lighty, or they might need to run down and deal with it after. Either way, this is going to be a close one as Games Revolted starts up on Yasma here, popping that Bloodlust that is available to them, something that Method and A does not have, and are looking desperately to close out this match and stay in this upper bracket.
So there's the Sky Screamer coming in from Method and A, as you can see it in the back, being received by the Windwalker. Now this is something that might actually cost Games Revolted the game here, as they were single targeting the Sky Screamer pretty much, instead of just dragging it along with them to the last boss fight. Now they did have to wait for the roleplay, for the stairs to actually spawn, so it wasn't inefficient to attack the Sky Screamer, but to finish it all the way off, when he could have just run up to the boss and engaged the boss and succeed the Sky Screamer, that might actually be the one thing that cost them here, because they did have the Bloodlust ready, they did have enough damage to kill the boss faster because of the Bloodlust advantage, but because Method and A just pulled the boss so much earlier, they're ahead now, even with not having Bloodlust. Yeah,
Bloodlust is all for both teams. Second round of cooldowns should be coming up for Method and A in not too long from now, as Yasma is hitting 25%. Nerf Clap popping his shield wall, just making sure to add a bit of extra survivability as the rest of the team diverts focus to the Sky Screamer on the side. Finally, they've pulled it. They need to make sure to cleave it down efficiently with the rest of the group. Bit of damage coming in here on the group from the 100 energy cast from Yasma, making sure that these images, as always, do not reach the boss. But Yasma, 10% on the board now for Method and A, as Games Revolted is at 25%, and it looks like Method is going to be able to close this one out just barely over Games Revolted, as they're going to take the series 2-0. But I mean, Nigger, that was a close one. It was really cool to see from Games Revolted on the other side, their strategies.
That was definitely really close, as Method and A just has to kill off the Sky Screamer to win the game 2-0, but Games Revolted not far behind